In 2011, police discovered the body of a young woman in her home. The victim had been brutally and coldly murdered. All 10 of her fingers had been mercilessly severed. A striking yellow hair clip remained in her hair, creating a haunting contrast with the bloody scene. This case bore a chilling resemblance to a previous 2004 tape wrap murder in D-Zone, where the victim was suffocated by the tape. The perpetrator of that case remains at large. These horrifying similarities led police to suspect this was likely a serial murder. Forensic experts indicated the victim's fingers were severed while she was still alive. However, strangely, there were numerous bloodstains on the outside of the tape, a significant difference from the case 7 years prior. Ji-hun suspected that the victim had put up a fierce resistance before dying. She tried to remove the tape from her head, which is why her hands were covered in so much blood. The forensic team carefully removed the layers of blue tape from the victim's head. The bloodshot eyes indicated that the victim had indeed died from suffocation. Ji-hun looked at the victim's chin. He noticed an area of skin that was completely free of blood. This proved that the killer had only gagged Eun-bi, wanting her to witness her fingers being cut off. During the case analysis meeting, Ji-hun explained to the leaders the similarities between this case and the 2004 D-Zone case. At the scene, the police found no fingerprints or footprints. Even evidence of cover-up was not found. However, the killer in the D-Zone case cut off the victim's fingers to conceal her identity. The victim, Eun-bi, died in her own home. This suggests that the two cases were not committed by the same person. However, Ji-hun was able to determine that the perpetrator was a psychopath who reveled in the torment of his victims. The leadership decided to appoint Ji-hun as the captain of the special task force. Ji-hun listened repeatedly to the anonymous phone call. The caller reported that the woman on the second floor of the Perry Villa had died. This indicated that someone had been present around the crime scene. Ji-hun searched for suitable locations to observe the victim's room many times. He then discovered many strands of hair in a hallway of the building opposite. Next, Ji-hun looked up the phone number that had reported the incident to the police. He then went to a public telephone booth. The man with long hair was called to the police station. Clearly, he was somewhat anxious. He kept smoking to relieve his stress. Minho had a friend who worked at the National Bureau of Math, Science and Technology. This friend could retrieve DNA from cigarette butts. Minho then threw the found cigarette butts in front of the man. The long-haired man could only explain that he had seen a dead person in the room. He feared unnecessary trouble, so he used a public phone to call the police. Ji-hun, however, felt things weren't that simple, so Ji-hun decided to bring the police to the long-haired man's house. The results were shocking. The long-haired man, who looked serious, was actually a pervert who stalked Eun-bi. His computer was full of pictures and videos of Eun-bi. Besides that, there was another man who was always in the camera's view. Ji-hun discovered that the long-haired man's camera contained images of Eun-bi's murder, but the long-haired man said that when he was walking down the hallway, Eun-bi had stopped moving. At this time, the Gangwon Provincial Criminal Investigation Department received intelligence. A man had ended his own life by climbing a cliff. Initial speculation was that he had died a month earlier. However, his identity remained unknown. Soon after, the police found a hotel at the foot of the mountain. They discovered video footage of the man entering the hotel before his death. Because he was near the elevator going up to his room to gamble, Officer Baek contacted the owner of the casino. She recognized the man immediately and was surprised to find out her client was dead. Officer Baek asked the casino owner if the man had ended his own life because he owed gambling debts. Without hesitation, the owner denied it. She stated that although she didn't know the man's circumstances, he had a younger sister who was very good at making money. Every time the man lost at gambling, he would beg his sister to help him pay off his debts, and this sister was Eun-bi, a barmaid. So, Officer Baek ordered a lockdown of the Gangwon area. Baek was certain he would find a clue there. Sure enough, an officer found a woman's bracelet in the grass. Before Eun-bi's brother died, he received a phone call from a phone booth near the crime scene, which lacked surveillance cameras. Officer Baek repeatedly called the victim's sister's phone, but no one answered. Suspicious of Eun-bi, Officer Baek went to her house. However, he was stopped by the police guarding the crime scene. It was then that Officer Baek knew Eun-bi had been murdered. The female police officer who came with Baek also wanted to find the victim. It turned out that Jae-ri had received a missing person case. A few days ago, this man's fiancée, Eun-young, suddenly disappeared. Her living conditions were relatively comfortable. After Jae-ri inquired, she knew that 3 months ago, Eun-bi's brother had paid a detective agency to investigate a girl adopted from an orphanage, and that girl was Eun-young. Officer Baek wanted to see the photo album in Eun-young's house because he wanted to see if there were any pictures of Eun-young wearing a bracelet, but Jae-ri snatched the album and wouldn't let him see it because she discovered discovered that In-bi and Un-young looked exactly alike. Minho quickly reported to Ji-hun that the man in the video was In-bi's brother. However, they were not related by blood. Un-bi was adopted by her brother's family. By the time Ji-hun and Minho decided to go find this brother, Officer Baek had already returned to the police station. Baek introduced himself as a police officer from Gangwon province, in charge of Un-bi's brother's case. This surprised Ji-hun greatly, but what surprised Ji-hun even more was that the person in the photo Jae-ri was holding was the victim's twin sister. This case was becoming increasingly strange. Unexpectedly, it involved so many people. Half an hour later, Minho confirmed their relationship. Un-bi and Un-young were twin sisters who grew up together in an orphanage. However, in 1995 and 1997, Un-bi and Un-young were adopted in different places. Ji-hun felt that Un-young's disappearance was highly suspicious, so they decided to go to Un-bi's brother's house. From the photo album, Officer Baek found a bracelet. It was identical to the one found at the crime scene. Officer Baek suspected that Un-young knew her younger sister was constantly being bullied by her adoptive brother, so she killed him. At this moment, Minho hurriedly called Ji-hun to investigate. Minho discovered many images on Un-young's computer related to the 2004 murder. Un-young's research on these matters certainly had a purpose. If Un-young and Un-bi were twins, then the lack of the killer's DNA at the crime scene would be explained, as the twins' DNA matched. Un-young had become a suspect in 2 murders. Ji-hun invited Officer Baek to join his special task force, knowing his senior's strong investigative abilities. However, Ji-hun excluded Jae-ri, leaving Jae-ri somewhat disappointed. Jae-ri voiced his question. If Un-young had killed the bully who harassed her younger sister, why would she also kill her innocent younger sister? After asking, Jae-ri left. However, Jae-ri went straight to the orphanage. From the photo album there, she saw a pair of identical sisters. The director remembered the younger sister very well. She said that although they were twins, their personalities were completely opposite. In-bi was introverted and didn't like to talk, while her older sister, In-young, was lively and intelligent. After a couple saw the video, they decided to adopt In-young. However, after her sister left, In-bi became even more withdrawn. In-bi also knew a secret that no one else knew. It turned out that the adoptive parents initially intended to adopt Soo-jin, but something happened during the adoption process. While Un-young was carrying hot water, she accidentally spilled it on Soo-jin. Un-young cried and blamed Soo-jin. Afterwards, everyone gossiped that Un-young had done it intentionally. Un-young's goal was to leave the orphanage, and the girl covered in scars was Soo-jin. Soo-jin said that the orphanage was like hell, but compared to the cruel orphanage director who deserved to die, Un-young deserved hell more. Soo-jin saw with her own eyes that Un-young not only took her sister's toys, but also put a gold hair clip on her sister's head. Anyone with that gold hair clip on their head had to go to the director's office that night. Un-young had heartlessly sent her sister to hell on earth, so there was nothing Un-young wouldn't dare to do. Therefore, Soo-jin was certain that Un-young had deliberately spilled the boiling water on her. Furthermore, Un-young coldly abandoned her poor twin sister to enjoy happiness that didn't belong to her. Therefore, Soo-jin hated In-young so much she wished she could kill her. This greatly surprised Jae-ri. Jae-ri never imagined there was such a deep-seated animosity between Un-young and her sister. Jae-ri quickly reported this clue to Officer Baek. The next day, Minho went to the university where Un-young was studying. Minho discovered she was a mathematical genius. However, she only borrowed crime detective books from the school library. Moreover, the teachers said that Un-young seemed like a different person recently. There were many simple questions Un-young couldn't answer. The police also collected video footage of Un-young returning home on the night of the crime. Ji-hun felt that the method of killing Un-bi was very complicated, but in a short time, Un-young had changed her clothes and gone home. This was completely illogical. Officer Baek told Minho to stop the video. Officer Baek felt something was very strange. Un-young had clearly returned to her home, but why did she look like she didn't know the place? Ji-hun immediately noticed the anomaly, so the two of them rushed to the location shown in the video. Ji-hun analyzed that only after Un-young saw the sign did she identify the location of her apartment. This proved that the person in the video was not Un-young, but her younger sister, Un-bi. This also explained why the killer cut off the victim's fingertips, because fingerprints are the only way to distinguish identical twins. Furthermore, this coincided with Jae-ri's investigation. Had hated her sister for 17 years, so Un-young was the victim and her younger sister was the real killer. Through medical insurance records, Minho discovered that 3 months prior, Un-young had been diagnosed with terminal pancreatic cancer. A forensic autopsy was also performed, and the results matched the hospital's diagnosis. However, the amount of medication the victim had taken before her death was 3 times higher than normal. This seemed unusual. The police speculated that the killer had forced Eun-young to take the medication. However, there was one point Ji-hun couldn't explain. Surveillance cameras showed Eun-bi leaving the bar at 12 o'clock and arriving home at 12:42 a.m. Along the way, Eun-bi had to go home to kill her sister, but that time wasn't enough for her to do so. To verify if there was any discrepancy in the results, Ji-hun tricked Minho into going to the crime scene. Then he got into a taxi and sped from the bar to there. Minho didn't know what was happening, but suddenly, a figure pinned him to the ground. Ji-hun used his fastest speed to subdue Minho. Then Ji-hun quickly wrapped tape symbolically around Minho's hands and head. Then Ji-hun told the driver to speed to Eun-young's house. Ji-hun rushed to the camera location, but the result was still 7 minutes too late. Ji-hun couldn't understand how Eun-bi managed to match the time. At this moment, Officer Beck came out of the room. On the day of the crime, Eun-bi had already gone home, but the murder with tape was committed in a room. Officer Beck felt this was simply inexplicable. After the police gathered and reviewed many surveillance videos, they discovered that about 2 months prior, Eun-bi and Eun-young had started seeing each other regularly, and all expenses were paid with Eun-young's card. At that moment, Jae-ri walked in and was stunned by what she saw on the screen. It turned out that Jae-ri had just met with Eun-young's boyfriend. Jae-ri had told him about Eun-young's terminal pancreatic cancer, but she hadn't mentioned the specifics. Unexpectedly, the boyfriend became even more heartbroken. He said that a few days before Eun-young disappeared, she suddenly suggested renting a hotel room. Afterward, Eun-young had offered herself to him for the first time. However, the boyfriend felt that Eun-young had become a different person. She was completely unlike before. Later, when Eun-young's boyfriend proposed marriage, Eun-young suddenly wanted to break up. Now he knew that Eun-young had cancer, which was why she decided to leave him. Everyone was amazed by Eun-bi's perfect plan. It turned out that Eun-bi not only wanted to kill her sister, but she also wanted to steal her sister's fiancé. From then on, Eun-bi would live the happy life of Eun-young. Ji-hun guessed that Eun-bi was currently in hiding. The reason Eun-bi didn't want to appear was because she was waiting for the police to announce the results. So the police complied with Eun-bi's wish. They announced to reporters that this was indeed a murder case, and the culprit was the same murderer from the 2004 murder case. Just 1 day later, Eun-bi did indeed go to the police station. Eun-bi asked the police to let her see her sister's body one last time. No one knew how much Eun-bi suffered because she wasn't the murderer. Any girl wearing a yellow hair clip who entered the director's office would be rewarded by him. However, Soo-jin wasn't the only victim at the orphanage. Eun-bi lay in bed and told her older sister that the director had told her to be at the office at 9 o'clock. But Eun-bi wasn't allowed to tell anyone. Eun-young, upon hearing this, came up with a plan. Knowing her younger sister was targeted by the director, Eun-young secretly told Eun-bi that since they couldn't sleep anyway, they could play a game of identity swap. This was the game they often played together. The innocent younger sister immediately closed her eyes. After Eun-young finished reciting the incantation, she removed the gold hair clip from her sister's head and clipped it back into her own hair. This was the only way to save Eun-bi. At exactly 9 o'clock, Eun-young stealthily climbed out of bed. Eun-bi, thinking her sister had left her behind, and went to the director's office to play alone. She was then tricked into going to the director's office in her sister's place. After Eun-bi saw her older sister enter the room, she slowly walked up the stairs. But as soon as Eun-bi saw the scene before her, she was so frightened that she covered her mouth. Eun-bi's face was filled with terror. Then, Eun-bi panicked and ran away. A while later, Eun-bi heard her older sister returning to take a shower. Eun-bi silently shed tears. At this moment, Eun-bi realized her sister was protecting her. But that day, Eun-bi received a yellow hair clip. Eun-young saw Eun-bi secretly watching the two of them, so she quickly slapped her younger sister. The two pretended to argue. Then, Eun-young quickly clipped the yellow hair clip onto her sister's head. But Eun-young knew that continuing like this wasn't the solution, until one day, Eun-young saw a couple who came to adopt Soo-jin. Eun-young intentionally burned Soo-jin. At that moment, Eun-young was truly terrified, but to help her younger sister leave the orphanage, Eun-young was willing to do anything. Sure enough, after the couple saw Eun-young's performance, they fell in love with her. Eun-young offered to swap clothes with her sister. Eun-young told Eun-bi that as long as the spell wasn't broken, the game would continue. Only when they met again would their identities be reversed. After saying this, Eun-young removed the golden hair clip from her sister's head and clipped it into her own. From the moment the two sisters were separated, Unyoung became a quiet, withdrawn girl. This separation lasted 17 years. One day, Eunbi saw her sister in front of a hotel. Eunbi was surprised to find her sister working as a barmaid. Unyoung knew their lives were now completely opposite, so she used the harshest words to drive her sister away. But Eunbi hired a private investigator to look into her sister's whereabouts. Wanting to protect her sister, Unyoung lied to drive her away. Unyoung said her life was completely different from Eunbi's, and that Eunbi couldn't understand Unyoung's suffering. She asked her sister to stop pretending to be kind, saying it disgusted her. Unyoung said this because she feared her brother in the room would hurt Eunbi, but Eunbi refused to give up, knowing she didn't have much time left. Finally, Unyoung accepted the sister she had always longed for. One day, Eunbi summoned her sister to a villa. Eunbi told Unyoung that she was seriously ill and only had a few days left to live. Eunbi decided to restore her sister's identity and give Unyoung the life she deserved. First, Eunbi arranged to meet Unyoung's adoptive brother. He not only gambled, but also bullied Unyoung. He forced Unyoung to earn money to pay off his debts. He even lived with his foster sister. While Unyoung wasn't paying attention, Eunbi pushed him off a cliff. Then she faked his death as an end his own life, hoping to prevent him from causing Unyoung any more trouble. But Eunbi didn't realize that Unyoung was heartbroken because she couldn't contact her foster brother. Although her foster brother always bullied Unyoung, he helped her not feel lonely. Unyoung begged her sister to help her find her foster brother. Eunbi was speechless after hearing this. Unexpectedly, when the two sisters switched identities, Unyoung had become shy and weak. Unyoung was exactly like Eunbi when she was a child. But Eunbi no longer had time to think about this. Her older sister had to follow her plan. First, Eunbi recounted the important events after she left the orphanage. Eunbi wrote everything down and asked Unyoung to memorize it. Then, Eunbi told her sister to go to the university she was attending so she could get acquainted with the people and environment there. Next, Eunbi researched all the unsolved cases in Korea. Finally, Eunbi chose the tape murder case in D-Zone. Eunbi locked herself at home, carefully studying all the details of this case. After Eunbi died, Unyoung could escape everything in the past. Unyoung would continue to live a happy life. Eunbi used blue tape to tightly wrap her head. Eunbi also cut off 10 of her fingertips. She left this world forever. However, the police still found a loophole at the crime scene. At the scene where Unyoung's adoptive brother died, the police found a woman's bracelet. Through surveillance cameras, the police discovered that Unyoung was unfamiliar with her home. Her fiancé, however, said Unyoung seemed like a different person. These factors led the police to suspect Unyoung was the murderer. When the police issued an arrest warrant, Unyoung appeared at the police station with her hands wrapped in bandages. The police investigation revealed that Unyoung had destroyed her own fingerprints, following Eunbi's dying instructions. Thus, the police could not distinguish between the two twins. When Unyoung saw her sister's body, she felt as if her heart was being pierced by 1,000 knives. The police wanted to use a lie detector to verify Unyoung's testimony. They wanted to prove that she was Eunbi. But because Unyoung had memorized everything her sister had written, and this was also a chance for Unyoung to start her life over, Eunbi had sacrificed her life for this opportunity. Unyoung's willpower was incredibly strong. She answered every question fluently. Ji-hun knew that if this girl could prove she was Unyoung, then the two murder cases would no longer be connected to her. Even though this lie detector test completely failed, Ji-hun did not give up on justice. He asked a question to Unyoung and Eunbi. Ji-hun asked about Unyoung first, saying that 3 months ago, she had been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. After hearing this, Unyoung's emotions were unstable, because this was the first time Unyoung knew what disease her sister had. The second question was for Eunbi. Why were Unyoung's fingers cut off while she was still alive? At this moment, the lie detector beeped. Because Unyoung didn't know how her sister ended her own life, Ji-hun knew that the lie detector test results couldn't be used as evidence in court, but he was confident that he could make this woman confess. Now the real battle had begun. But after Ji-hun left, Unyoung burst into tears of anguish. Officer Baek outside was so angry he paced back and forth. He believed something must have gone wrong somewhere. At this point, Minho told him that Unyoung was murdered around midnight. Unyoung's phone had been on for 6 hours. Officer Baek's intuition told him that there must be a crucial clue in that phone, so the police began expanding their search throughout the building. At this moment, Jerry suddenly approached. Jerry said that Unyoung hadn't lied. Unyoung was indeed the older sister of the victim, Eunbi. It turned out that Jerry discovered Eunbi's diary entries were written at the same time, because the entries from many years ago hadn't faded at all. When Jerry saw the photo of Unyoung being adopted, she couldn't help but panic. Jerry quickly played the video of Unyoung dancing as a child. Then Jae-ri compared Eun-young's eyes with Eunbi's at that time. Now Jae-ri was certain that the person adopted all those years ago was Eunbi. The truth was that Eun-young had always protected her younger sister. Jae-ri was an outsider, so she had always viewed the two sisters from a biased and malicious perspective. Therefore, Jae-ri felt that everything Eun-young said was a lie. Jae-ri asked why Eun-young didn't speak about her suffering. Why didn't she tell everyone that she burned someone just so her sister could have a better life? But Eun-young suppressed her grief and remained silent. At this moment, Ji-hoon also felt that what Jae-ri said was probably true. Jae-ri took out the diary that Eunbi had written. Jae-ri gently said that Eun-young had lived a life of hardship in place of her younger sister. But when Eunbi died, she wore a yellow hair clip. What was Eunbi trying to imply? Yet Eun-young only cried and refused to speak. Eun-young gently stroked her sister's picture with her bandaged hands. Her heart ached, and tears streamed down her face. Jae-ri asked what exactly happened that night, but Eun-young said sorrowfully that she truly knew nothing. At this moment, Ji-hun suddenly stood up. No wonder the mystery in Ji-hun's heart remained unsolved. It turned out there was no murderer in this case at all. Meanwhile, bank police found Eunbi's phone. It was inside a glass jar containing paper cranes. This was the last thing Eunbi did for her sister. If Eun-young was still being prosecuted by the police, this video could prove that Eunbi had ended her own life. In the video, Eunbi clipped a yellow hair clip onto her head. After taking her cancer medication, she taped her mouth shut. Then, she used a cutting tool to cut off each of her fingertips. At this point, everyone was baffled as to why Eunbi would be so cruel to herself. After Jae-ri knew the whole truth, she bowed her head and walked away. Suddenly, Eun-young, standing behind her, was stunned. When Eun-young heard her sister's painful scream, she collapsed to the ground. Minho quickly turned off the video. Jae-ri also quickly comforted Eun-young, but Ji-hun turned the video back on. Ji-hun believed that if Eun-young broke down at this moment, all of her sister's efforts would be in vain. After Ji-hun finished speaking, he left. Now, he no longer wanted to know who this woman was. Eun-young struggled to her feet, bravely facing what lay before her. Eunbi was no longer the timid girl she once was. Eun-young hoped the old incantation could come true. She wanted to become her younger sister, to endure all this suffering. However, all Eun-young could do now was to persevere and live on, because Eun-young's life no longer belonged solely to her. A few days later, the investigation team received another murder case. A family of 4 had all died, except for a senile old woman. The girl had been stabbed multiple times before she died, and she was horrified to discover someone hiding under the bed. Jae-ri was lying where the girl's body had been, holding a photograph of the victim in her hand. Jae-ri felt there was something strange about the victim's eyes. Her pupils were dilated, seemingly filled with terror. Jae-ri observed from the victim's perspective and imagined that before dying, the victim had seen something outside the window. Jae-ri didn't consider what was under the bed. This burglary and murder occurred this morning. The nanny had just returned from the market when she was horrified to find her employer dead on the sofa. Before the nanny could recover from the shock, the old woman suddenly appeared from behind the sofa. Her face was covered in fresh blood, and she was muttering something incessantly. The nanny, terrified, quickly called the police. Upstairs, there were 3 other bodies: the old woman's daughter-in-law, grandson, and granddaughter. The police discovered a message written on the living room wall. "The rich are the public's enemies." This is quite similar to the methods used by the cult in 1993. Furthermore, from the chaotic footprints on the floor, the police could see that the perpetrator was definitely not a single person. Clearly, this group of criminals was imitating the previous criminal group. The police department's operator reported that they received a call when the crime occurred, but the caller hung up before finishing her sentence, so the operator didn't notify the police at the scene. When Officer Bake circled the villa, he discovered it was the only blind spot for the surveillance cameras. He found it puzzling that so many people could have committed the crime and left without leaving any trace. The tide rises during the day and falls at night. It could have submerged the footprints or tire tracks. Officer Bake felt that the perpetrator must have taken advantage of the ebb and flow of the tide, running along the embankment and escaping. At this point, Officer Bake noticed 2 pairs of shoes placed on the sand. The 2 boys playing nearby weren't barefoot. Officer Bake then asked the 2 boys where they had gotten their shoes. Following their directions, Officer Bake discovered a black plastic bag nestled in a rock crevice. The special task force took over the case. The 4 bodies were those of the 4 members of the family. Ji-hun noticed that the wounds on the victims' bodies were unusually flat. Through forensic analysis, Ji-hun discovered a total of 49 stab wounds on the 4 victims. However, each victim had 1 fatal wound, while the other wounds were inflicted after death. Forensic expert Choi also discovered something significant. The granddaughter had been attacked twice, face. Ji-hun believed the killer might have realized she was trying to report him to the police, which is why he attacked her again. Clearly, the perpetrator stabbed the victims once with a fatal blow, but he also stabbed them multiple times around the area. Perhaps the perpetrator did this to conceal the fact that he committed the crime alone. Afterward, the special task force listened to the recording of the girl's call to the police. Ji-hun requested that the technical staff remove the background noise. Just as the girl's cries for help rang out, someone said, "The ball went into the net." This indicates that the homeowner was watching football when the incident occurred. If multiple people had simultaneously attacked the girl, such a situation would certainly not have happened. Officer Baek also raised suspicions because the girl mentioned the words "they" twice in the recording. Officer Baek believed there was more than one perpetrator. Jae-ri suddenly spoke up, saying that the girl had stared out the window before she died. This suggests she may have seen someone else. At this point, the forensic team discovered that the shoes in the black bag belonged to the victim. They were the same shoes Officer Baek had brought back from the beach. This indicated that after the murder, the killer wore these shoes and stepped on the bloodstains. Therefore, many footprints were left in the room, leading the police to make a wrong assumption. Based on the spacing between the similar footprints, Ji-hun speculated that the killer was no taller than 1.6 meters. This also meant the killer could be just one person. Minho argued that one person couldn't possibly kill all 4 victims. Furthermore, the 4 victims weren't asleep at the time. Jae-ri then chimed in. She had investigated and found that the deceased boy was a game addict, and the girl was a student preparing for a talent show. Their mother enjoyed playing golf at home, and their father was a passionate soccer player. This means that when the crime occurred, all 4 victims were focused on their own activities. This also created an opportunity for the killer to act. However, one thing still puzzled Jae-ri. The victims' postures clearly showed they were completely defenseless. Finally, Ji-hun concluded that the killer was very familiar with the family's daily routines. Moreover, he could easily enter the house. The "they" the girl mentioned could refer to the killer and his accomplice. Currently, there are only 2 suspects. One is the nanny with no motive for murder, and the other is the elderly woman suffering from dementia. The police were surprised to find that she possessed 400 billion won. It turned out she was a real estate speculator in the 1970s, so most of her assets were real estate, but she never made a will. She also didn't transfer all of her real estate to her son. Officer Beck asked what would happen if the old woman died. Because she didn't make a will, the property would definitely go to her second son. However, the second son had a somewhat flawed personality. He was also the youngest son of the old woman. But just because the old woman refused to eat the rice her son fed her, he got angry and threw the bowl. The nanny said that the old woman's stomach hadn't been well lately, but when the nanny fed her, the old woman happily ate. Seeing this, the youngest son immediately smiled brightly, because now he was also the sole heir. At this moment, Officer Beck and Minho entered. The youngest son asked who they were. Officer Beck said he was a police officer. Hearing this, the youngest son said that he had already given evidence that he wasn't present at the scene. Officer Beck couldn't help but chuckle at this. He and his colleagues came here because the youngest son had violated the restraining order. The police investigated and discovered that the youngest son had physically abused his mother. Therefore, his older brother had obtained a restraining order against him, and if the youngest son continued to disobey, the police would arrest him. Just as the youngest son was about to explain, Ji-hun entered. He went straight to the old woman's bed and asked if she remembered the deaths of 4 members of her family. The old woman looked up at the ceiling and said nothing. Ji-hun decided to take her to the crime scene. The youngest son, upon hearing this, became enraged. He immediately transformed into a filial son, wanting to protect his mother. Minho also felt this was illogical, but before he could finish speaking, the youngest son lunged at him, only to be gently pushed down by Ji-hun. Ji-hun only wanted to know if the old woman was involved in the case. Perhaps the old woman was spared because she was useful to the killer. Looking at the blood stain on the sofa, the old woman suddenly remembered something. Meanwhile, Jae-ri spread her legs and slowly lay down in the place where the dead girl had been. As her face was about to touch the ground, she tilted her head and looked under the bed. She saw another pair of eyes and screamed in fear. At this moment, the nanny also screamed in fear, saying that her son liked to hide in dark places. Immediately recalled the crime, Jae-ri couldn't understand why the old woman's granddaughter died with her eyes open, because there was someone under the bed. At the same time, the old woman looked at the bloodstain on the sofa. It seemed she remembered her dead son. The old woman slowly reached out her hand and wept bitterly. Ji-hun silently observed until the old woman fainted on the sofa. He felt that if the old woman was the killer, her acting was truly extraordinary. The old woman's youngest son was taken to the police devastation. After his mother's death, he would become the sole heir to her 400 billion won fortune. The youngest son became increasingly excited as he thought about it. In fact, he was the one most like his mother. They were both so greedy that they would stop at nothing. His belief in life was given to him by his mother. The youngest son said that he had to steal someone else's rice bowl to be full, and if someone else took his rice bowl, he would starve. However, the police couldn't do anything to the youngest son because he had a whitelist. At this time, Minho discovered that the victim's landline phone had been calling the same number every day this week. That number belonged to a man named Wang Tae. He used to follow the old woman around when she was young. During those years, when Wang Tae followed the old woman to demolish the house, he committed all sorts of wicked deeds. Officer Baek asked why the old woman called Wang Tae. Wang Tae didn't expect the police to be looking for him just because of this. Although he breathed a sigh of relief, a look of unease appeared on his face. Wang Tae said he didn't know what the old woman wanted to say, but in short, it all revolved around that house. Just then, the old woman called again. Officer Baek took the phone that Wang Tae handed him. The old woman mumbled that the villa she was living in now was her favorite place, but someone wanted to steal it. She told Wang Tae to eliminate those with ill intentions. From the conversation, it was clear that the old woman had committed many wicked acts in the past. Jinhyun temporarily ruled out the possibility that the old woman murdered her eldest son. Therefore, the only suspect was the nanny. However, the police continued to rule her out as a suspect. Because the nanny had no motive to kill anyone, Jerry wanted to know why the old woman only ate food cooked by the nanny. The nanny explained that the old woman always suspected her eldest son's family of poisoning her rice so they could steal her vast fortune. At this moment, the nanny's son ran up, but he seemed to be mentally disabled. The nanny told her son to go upstairs to play first. Jerry heard this and asked if he often came here to play, but the nanny immediately denied it. Since this was someone else's house, how could she often let her son come here to play? Jerry suspected the nanny was lying because her son was mentally disabled but could easily find his way here. Moreover, he seemed very familiar with the house, so Jerry suspected he came here frequently. At this moment, through the surveillance camera, Minho and Officer Baek discovered something unexpected. After the nanny's son opened the door to the room, he crawled under the bed. After seeing this, Jihoon couldn't help but suspect the nanny and her son. At the same time, Jerry saw several ants crawling towards the old woman's bowl of rice. Curious, she tried a bite and found the rice very sweet. It turned out that the old woman wasn't afraid of her family poisoning her. The nanny always put sugar in her rice, so she only ate the rice the nanny fed her. After the nanny finished eating, she sat drinking coffee and watching the sunset, acting as if she owned the villa. Jihoon knew from the notary that when the nanny's husband sold the house, he was cheated and lost everything. He also owed a large sum of money with high interest rates, so the nanny's husband was burning charcoal, intending to die with his whole family. Unfortunately, only the old man and his daughter lost their lives, while the nanny miraculously survived. The accident resulted in her giving birth to a son with intellectual disabilities. Jerry opened the nanny's computer and discovered that the search results were all images related to the villa. Through this, Jerry also knew all of the nanny's secrets. At that moment, Jerry noticed someone approaching and quickly turned off the lights. Suddenly, a dark figure pinned Jerry against the wall. When she looked closely, she realized it was Jihoon. Jerry said that since the nanny came to the old woman's house, it seemed like everything in the villa was arranged by the nanny. Moreover, the nanny no longer boasted about the villa online. It turned out that from the first time the nanny came to work at the old woman's house, she had fallen in love with the villa. Whenever the four members of the family left the house, the nanny would secretly bring her son here. The old woman was completely unaware of the nanny's intentions. Just having someone by her side made her happy. But after a long time here, the nanny realized things were becoming increasingly inconvenient. Because her son didn't want to leave the house, she had to hide him under the bed. Finally, she decided to kill all four of them to seize the mansion for herself. That night, Jihoon personally came to the mansion to find the nanny. Jihoon wanted the nanny to confess to the murders. Jihoon said that the old woman's youngest son had inherited the property and was preparing to sell the house. Hearing this, the nanny became worried and confused. She didn't want to leave. The nanny hastily said that the old woman was used to being here. Moreover, the old woman only ate the meals she cooked. Jihoon said that actually, getting the old woman to eat wasn't difficult. All she needed to do was add more sugar to the rice. The nanny didn't expect the police to know her secret. She thought that by keeping the obedient old woman and killing everyone else, she and her son could stay here forever. The nanny quickly turned away, pretending not to understand. Suddenly, Jihoon smashed the vase in her hand. The nanny reacted immediately and ran over. Immediately afterward, Jihoon picked up a golf club. Ji-hun knocked over all the decorative items in the room. Then, Ji-hun tore down the curtains and threw them to the ground. The nanny's expression finally changed, but Ji-hun continued to provoke her. Ji-hun then smashed a pane of glass in the living room. The nanny's eyes were filled with anger because she considered this her own home. At that moment, Ji-hun picked up a picture frame containing a family photo of the nanny and her 2 children. Ji-hun prepared to smash the frame, shattering the nanny's dreams in the process. Suddenly, the nanny screamed, demanding that Ji-hun stop. Ji-hun then questioned the nanny, asking if she was the murderer. She claimed to have killed all 4 of them alone. The nanny explained that the 4 of them knew nothing of family. They didn't communicate, living only in their own separate spaces. So, she took the opportunity to stab each of them. After killing the mother and her 2 children, the man downstairs was still rejoicing at the goal. Those 4 didn't deserve to live here. Only the nanny could fill this house with happiness. This was the house the nanny had dreamed of. She wondered why her son had to hide under the bed. The nanny then warned Ji-hun that he shouldn't come to her house again without her permission. Ji-hun felt the woman in front of him had gone mad. She wanted to take what belonged to others for herself. Because of her selfishness, the nanny was willing to use any means, even killing innocent people. Ji-hun asked the nanny to stop dreaming and come to her senses. Unexpectedly, the nanny picked up a knife. Jae-ri, standing outside, was extremely worried, but Officer Baek said that if Ji-hun couldn't handle a woman, he should quit his job as a police officer. Inside the house, the nanny was still not calm. She still couldn't understand why her husband and daughter had to die. The nanny said that her family's wishes were actually very simple. They just wanted to live a peaceful life. But some people disregarded the law, swindling the nanny's husband out of everything. Those people included the old woman. They didn't want to gamble away all their savings, but every parent wants to give their child a bigger house. But why did all hope vanish into thin air in an instant? And why did the criminals enjoy a happy life? The nanny's words plunged Ji-hun into deep thought. While Ji-hun was still lost in thought, a knife was plunged into him. Ji-hun snatched the knife from the nanny's hand. Then, Ji-hun comforted the poor woman, telling her she should find the answer herself. Why could happiness disappear in the blink of an eye? Perhaps this question would never be answered. The nanny's dream finally ended. She truly wanted to leave this world, but who would take care of her poor son? The nanny dropped the knife in her hand. She had abandoned her evil intentions. However, the nanny's sins were so profound that she could never receive the forgiveness of the world. The man was massaging the corpse. The woman, now awake, was too frightened to make a sound. Now the only way to continue living was to feign death. But the woman couldn't hold out any longer. The sounds she made startled the man. He hadn't expected her to come back to life. However, now the man had no way out, so he tried to kill her. On Sunday morning, the police received a report. The police chief immediately summoned Ji-hun. Because this victim was no ordinary person, she not only engaged in both legitimate and illicit activities within the political and business world, but she also possessed evidence of the dirty tricks of those in power. Later, the police discovered that the last person the victim saw before her death was Counselor Chung. The kind-hearted police chief reminded Ji-hun that he must be very careful in this investigation. Forensic expert Choi speculated that the victim died around 8 p.m. on Saturday. There were signs of strangulation on her head. Furthermore, the back of her head hit the edge of a table, resulting in a fractured cervical vertebra. Therefore, the victim showed no signs of resistance during the assault. Counselor Chung obviously became the prime suspect in this case, because the chat logs between Counselor Chung and the victim showed that after receiving the message, he immediately went to the victim's villa. Moreover, the tire tracks in front of the villa matched those of the car driven by the perpetrator. Based on the CCTV footage from that night, Counselor Chung did indeed drive to the villa. Then, around 8:50 p.m., he returned to Seoul via the same route. Now the police only need to prove that the bodily fluids found in the victim belonged to Counselor Chung to proceed with his arrest. What surprised Ji-hun was that Counselor Chung voluntarily turned himself in to the police. He stated that the victim had sent him the video recording of the incident at the villa, but by the time he arrived, she was already dead. Counselor Chung said he knew the victim had great ambitions, but he didn't expect her to dare threaten him. Ji-hun asked why he didn't report it to the police. Counselor Chung vaguely replied that for someone in power, even a single hair on their body becomes precious, so he didn't want to hand over the CCTV footage. However, Counselor Chung agreed with the police that he would fully cooperate with the investigation. Later, Ji-hun went to see Counselor Chung's wife. Unexpectedly, she said that her husband didn't like women. This meant that on the night of the crime, the victim was with another man. Jae-ri discovered that the victim's villa also had a very large secret room, but it was filled with men's belongings. Officer Baek, disguised as a real estate agent, went into a women's nightclub. Officer Baek discovered discovered that after Jumi's death, a manager named Sunwoo temporarily took over the place. Sunwoo mistakenly thought that Officer Baek was there because of the final debt related to Jumi's villa. However, Officer Baek became interested in what happened at the villa. Sunwoo was afraid that saying too much would reveal the secret, so he only said a few words and left. But Officer Baek's intuition told him that this manager was suspicious, but the mobile phone signal analysis showed that from Friday night until the night of the crime, Sunwoo was always in the nightclub. At this time, a man named Lee Hun was brought to the police station. Minho asked Lee Hun if he had killed the victim, Jumi, but Lee Hun immediately denied it. Minho took out the surveillance video and asked Lee Hun why he was carrying a large bag, leaving the victim's villa on Friday night. Then Lee Hun got into Jumi's car. Lee Hun hastily explained that Sunwoo had called him that day. Sunwoo told Lee Hun to quickly pack his things and leave the villa, because Lee Hun didn't want to stay there and suffer humiliation anymore. Lee Hun took his luggage and ran away. Furthermore, the driver was Sunwoo, not Jumi. Then, Sunwoo quickly handed the phone to Lee Hun. Sunwoo said that Lee Hun must have been at the nightclub these days. During that time, Lee Hun received 6 calls, all from Jumi's number. However, the person on the other end was Sunwoo. This made Ji Hun pensive. So where exactly was Jumi on Friday night? Forensic expert Choi analyzed the body and found a lot of massage oil on the victim. Strangely, she hadn't showered before she died. After investigating, Officer Baek discovered that although Sunwoo was just a puppet of Jumi, the nightclub was registered under Sunwoo's name. Moreover, Sunwoo owed a lot of money, so Officer Baek began to monitor Sunwoo. Suddenly, a man appeared, startling Officer Baek. The man turned out to be a famous actor. Furthermore, he and Sunwoo seemed very close, so Officer Baek sent Jae-ri to the nightclub to investigate. It turned out that after the famous actor gained Jumi's favor, he was introduced into the entertainment industry. These men had all been to the basement of the villa. Officer Baek used his authority to interrogate the actor. The actor stated that he was present on the film set on Friday and Saturday nights. However, his assistant was extremely agitated. The assistant said Jumi was a madwoman who had secretly filmed dirty videos, but the actor quickly interrupted his assistant. It turned out that before the crime occurred, the actor had also received a video sent by Jumi. The video Jumi sent certainly had a purpose. Ji-hun returned to the villa where the crime took place. Despite searching everywhere, Ji-hun couldn't find the bottle of massage oil. Ji-hun began to suspect that this wasn't the initial crime scene. Ji-hun sat on the sofa, analyzing where he had overlooked something. Suddenly, an idea flashed through his mind. He then sat down and lifted the rug. He discovered a small amount of blood seeping into the floor. It turned out the killer had transported the table, the body, and the rug to this place. At this moment, Ji-hun recalled Friday night. Sunwoo had hastily asked Lee-hun to leave the villa, so Ji-hun knew who the killer was. At the police station, Sunwoo calmly looked at the evidence. Behind him, Ji-hun said that Sunwoo wanted to frame Counselor Chung because he knew that the latter would come to the villa every Saturday night. Then, Sunwoo massaged the body all night. He didn't want the body to stiffen or bruise, which would cause the police to misjudge the victim's time of death. Sunwoo even tried to deny the crime, claiming that he was always at the nightclub around that time. But Ji-hun said that only Sunwoo's phone was at the nightclub with this person. Then, police called Lee-hun into the interrogation room. Sunwoo's expression gradually became more and more grim. Sunwoo had no other choice but to take out the video from his phone. In the video, Jumi initially slapped the male actor. Then, she was pushed to the ground by him. The actor then lunged at Jumi and strangled her until she stopped breathing. It turned out that the murderer was the actor himself. Sunwoo said that he had many such secretly filmed videos at his place. All of them were secretly filmed at the orders of his boss, Jumi. The secret Jumi often told them was about wealth and power. Sunwoo said he felt sorry for the actor, and that's why he helped him. But in reality, Sunwoo had long wanted to kill Jumi. The actor himself admitted this to be true. He said that he called Jumi to his house because he received a secretly recorded video, but she refused to admit it. He angrily confronted her, but Jumi couldn't accept being treated so disrespectfully. Because he was so angry, he pushed Jumi to the ground. At that moment, his pent-up emotions finally erupted. He just wanted to release all the humiliation he had been holding back for years. However, he didn't realize that the fall had severely injured Jumi's head. Afterward, Jumi lay motionless. The actor insisted he truly didn't intend to kill her. Just then, Sunwoo rushed in. The two then moved the body to Jumi's villa. Next, they transported the table and rug to the living room, disguising it as the initial crime scene. At this moment, the actor suddenly remembered he had filming that night. Hearing this, Sunwoo told his friend to quickly leave the scene. Sunwoo would handle the rest. Sunwoo also reminded the actor that he absolutely must not mention this to anyone. On Saturday night, Sun-woo used Jumi's phone to contact Counselor Chung. Sun-woo waited until he saw the other party's car before leaving. Sun-woo believed that with Counselor Chung's status, everything would surely be resolved smoothly. This was the entire process of the case. Sun-woo said he volunteered to take full responsibility. At this point, Minho ran in and announced that the DNA in Jumi's body matched the actor's. This time, everything seemed to be over, but Ji-hoon felt that things weren't that simple. Ji-hoon called the forensic expert again to confirm if the victim's time of death was accurate. Forensic expert Choi replied that although the speculative result might be slightly inaccurate, she believed in the conclusion. At this point, Ji-hoon was absolutely certain that Jumi had died on Saturday night, not Friday night. Therefore, she must have been awake during that time, but someone had strangled her to death. The real killer wasn't the actor. After Sun-woo signed the statement, he said that Jumi was incredibly lucky to have survived the night. Ji-hoon didn't understand what Sun-woo was talking about. Then, Ji-hoon gave Sun-woo a package of documents sent by express delivery. The handwriting on it was exactly the same as Sun-woo's. Sun-woo hastily explained that it was all because Jumi forced him to do it. Ji-hoon then asked Sun-woo if Jumi had faked her death. Since Sun-woo didn't answer directly, Ji-hoon took out some photos. Ji-hoon said, "That's the mark of the ring." Ji-hoon dismissed the other party, saying that if the staff did a test, they could find out if the ring on Sun-woo's hand had left the mark. Ji-hoon asked Sun-woo again, was Jumi always pretending to be dead while Sun-woo was giving her a massage? But Sun-woo became angry and didn't answer. Then Ji-hoon continued, saying that the actor thought Sun-woo was a good person, so he absolutely trusted that Sun-woo wouldn't proactively report to the police. In this situation, Jumi showed no resentment at all. Jumi had no reason to send the video to Counselor Chung and the actor. At this point, Sun-woo knew that all his disguises had been exposed. Ji-hoon asked again, did she pretend to be dead or did she speak? Sun-woo said that after Jumi woke up, the first thing she asked was why he did it. This woman was Sun-woo's lifelong obsession. Jumi was like a queen, trampling on others' bodies every day. Even breathing required her permission. She held the weaknesses of everyone around Jumi. That's why Sun-woo filmed all of Jumi's secrets, including the shameful things those in power had done. One day, the actor received the video that Sun-woo had sent. He was so angry that he almost killed Jumi. The opportunity Sun-woo had been waiting for finally arrived. When Jumi begged Sun-woo to spare her, Sun-woo naturally refused. If this woman died, Sun-woo would become a true king. Those he had control over would have to submit to him. The case was finally solved. But just a few days later, the task force received a new case. A drunken man grabbed a girl by the head and dragged her down the street. The girl luckily escaped his grasp. She then knelt down and begged the bank employee to save her. As the employee was about to help, the man threatened her not to interfere. The employee was alone and didn't dare resist. Terrified, she pushed the girl's hand away. Afterward, the employee kept backing away, watching the man roughly drag the girl away. But the bank employee never imagined that the man would dare to commit murder right there in the street. The terrified employee returned to work. The guilt made it impossible for her to concentrate. 5 years later, she met a tragic end in them. Her hands were bound in front of her stomach, and an arrow was embedded in her chest. Her eyes were tightly blindfolded with rope. Forensic expert Choi bent down and discovered that the victim's ears had been pierced by a hard object. It was exactly the same as the case from 2 months ago. This led forensic expert Choi to speculate that the killer might be the same person. A piece of paper was found in the victim's pocket. It read, "With eyes like a blind person, with ears like a deaf person." Forensic expert Choi determined that the victim's hands had been bound while she was alive. Logically, after subduing the girl, the killer should have bound her hands behind her back. Otherwise, the victim could have untied her feet and escaped. Officer Baek looked at the body, completely baffled. Ji-hoon said that the two cases had almost identical methods of killing. From that, it could be seen that the killer was a very careful person. Unless he did it intentionally, the police arrived at the first crime scene on the mountain. The grass there was covered in blood. Strangely, a scarecrow was also erected nearby. This was exactly the same as the first case. However, the scarecrow's accessories had been removed by the killer. Ji-hoon picked up the rope from the ground. He noticed that the rope had clearly been cut by vegetables. Could the killer have wanted to help the victim untie herself so she could escape, or had she encountered a kind person at that moment? Officer Baek stepped back a few paces, looking at the blood-stained log. There were clearly traces left by someone running past. Officer Baek repeatedly gave commands, telling everyone to stay put and not move. Then, he wrapped warning tape around the damaged branches and placed small flags over the footprints. Although no one knew Officer Baek's intentions, they all followed his instructions. All the locations were clearly marked. Then, a surprising scene unfolded. Everyone in front seemed to be standing in a line. Officer Baek began to look from the murder scene to the distant tracks. Officer Baek couldn't understand why the victim had run in a straight line. Moreover, she had run to the scarecrow. 2 shoes lying on the rock indicated that this was where the victim had fallen. If she had been intentionally let go by the killer, then the killer should have followed her to enjoy the thrill of hunting prey. Even though the victim was about to be killed, no one came to her rescue. At that moment, her mood must have been desperate. Perhaps this was the killer's purpose. Furthermore, the killer was certainly very familiar with the terrain here. Not long after, the police investigated the victim's identity. Her name was Soo Young, 41 years old, and a bank employee. Ji-hun analyzed the situation and felt that the killer had left many clues at the scene. He certainly didn't choose his victim randomly. Officer Baek obtained the security camera footage from the police station. He watched the video and noticed that the killer had carefully observed the terrain before choosing the parking spot, as the poster conveniently obscured the car. However, Officer Baek still saw the victim being dragged out of the car. The forensic report also indicated the presence of sleeping pills in the victim's blood. Jae-ri went to the bank where Soo Young worked to investigate. Colleagues said that Soo Young was an extremely kind person, always ready to help those in need. The previous year, Soo Young had fought off a bank intruder. Therefore, she received an award for her courageous actions. When Jae-ri saw the photo of her receiving the award hanging on the wall, she immediately jumped up. No wonder Jae-ri found Soo Young so familiar, because Jae-ri was also present when Soo Young received the award. Coincidentally, the first victim was also a brave and good person. Minho began to analyze whether the 2 arrested criminals were the same person. After the first criminal was released from prison, he began a frenzied revenge spree. The 2 criminals in these 2 cases were not the same person. The troublemaker at the bank 2 months ago had been released from prison. Jae-ri said that the other criminal was still serving his sentence. Jae-ri's words contradicted Minho's opinion. The first criminal was the one Soo Young had sent to prison. As soon as Sang-tae was released from prison, he went to the church to repent. Sang-tae didn't know the police's purpose in coming to see him, but he could assure them that he wouldn't commit any more crimes. Jae-ri asked if he knew Soo Young. Sang-tae was slightly surprised by the question. He asked what had happened to Soo Young. Jae-ri then told Sang-tae that Soo Young was dead. More precisely, she had been murdered. Sang-tae was utterly shocked. He felt like he had lost something incredibly important. He said that Soo Young was the only person who had ever visited him in prison. At that time, Sang-tae had given up on everything. But under Soo Young's persuasive words, he decided to turn his life around. Thanks to Soo Young's encouragement, Sang-tae passed the entrance exam to the Theological Institute. However, Soo Young told him that she too had once been a person with a very serious crime, because 3 years ago, she had made a mistake. Jae-ri calculated that the 3 years Soo Young mentioned were actually 5 years ago. What exactly happened that year? Jae-ri went to Soo Young's house to find out. Her younger sister, Soo-joon, was still grieving the loss of her older sister. She only hoped the police could quickly catch the culprit. Jae-ri wanted to know what happened 5 years ago that caused Soo Young to be tormented by guilt for so long. Soo-joon said that it was because of that incident that her sister's personality had completely changed. No matter how much Soo-joon tried to comfort her sister, Soo Young still felt guilty. Soo-joon didn't know that this very incident had cost her sister her life. A 20-year-old girl was murdered by a man on the street, but the people around just stood by and watched instead of intervening. Someone secretly filmed this and uploaded it online. As a result, those onlookers were retaliated against. Soo-joon said that ever since the incident, her sister has been living with guilt and self-reproach, but she couldn't understand why her sister died in the forest. Ji-hun analyzed that after Soo Young stood up, she ran in this direction, but why did she only run in a straight line? Even though the victim was slashed and covered in wounds, she still kept running forward? Even after Soo Young rolled down the cliff, she continued to stand up and run forward. What did she see? When Ji-hun returned, he discovered someone had arrived at the crime scene. Officer Baek, shining a flashlight, felt relieved when he saw Ji-hun. However, the beam of light earlier helped the two of them discover something. It turned out that a flashlight was hanging on the scarecrow. This also explained why Soo Young kept running towards the scarecrow. The police speculated that while Soo Young was running away, she suddenly saw a beam of light in the distance. That was her only hope of survival. So Soo Young desperately ran towards it, but she was devastated to discover it was just a terrifying scarecrow hanging from a tree. At that moment, Soo Young seemed to lose all her strength and collapsed to the ground. But Ji-hun didn't know that the girl attacked on the street had used this desperate look in her eyes to plead for Soo Young's help. When her last hope was extinguished, she was completely hopeless. She was then murdered by the killer in a state of extreme fear. In the moment Soo Young saw the scarecrow, her fear was even greater than death itself. At this point, Ji-hun still hadn't figured out the killer's motive. motive. After he returned to the police station, Jerry recounted Soo-young's sister's words to him. Then, the police watched the video of the street murder from 5 years ago. At this moment, everyone's mood was incredibly heavy. If someone had intervened at that moment, perhaps the girl wouldn't have suffered such a tragic fate. But Ji-hun saw the first victim in the video. Just then, Minho suddenly ran into the room and announced that another body had appeared on Mount Dokma. This time, the victim was a 30-year-old golfer. The police quickly rewatched the video. Sure enough, they saw a man carrying a golf bag walking past the crime scene. At this point, the police also knew the killer's motive. Immediately told Minho to investigate the relatives of the girl killed on the street. They discovered that the girl only had a father. However, he didn't have a fixed address. Moreover, he had been working abroad for a long time, so the police couldn't contact him temporarily. Ji-hun speculated that the man must be in the country. He was seeking revenge for his daughter's tragic death. The police zoomed in on the people in the video, aiming to find those who had watched the girl being murdered. They then went house to house to cross-reference the information. 2 police officers would stay behind to guard the target. This was the best response the police could currently implement. Jerry mentioned that the person who posted the video had previously been subjected to a lot of online harassment. Ji-hun suddenly remembered that there was still one person missing. He quickly searched through all the video footage and found the overlooked individual, the person who filmed and posted the video online. The police then discovered that one of the victims had recorded the killer's words before dying. Officer Beck requested the technical staff to remove the background noise. In the recording, the killer asked the victim if she had felt the fear of dying without anyone to save her. Officer Beck felt the voice was incredibly familiar. It was very similar to the voice of the old coffee vendor he often encountered on his way up the mountain. Therefore, Officer Beck decided to go up the mountain alone. But everyone said the old coffee vendor hadn't been there for several days. At this moment, the person in the taxi was the one who had filmed the video, and the driver was the father of the murdered girl on the street. The old man casually mentioned the video from the news. The man said he was the one who had filmed it. The old man began to tell him a story. One day, while he was abroad, his daughter sent him a video. She said she was pregnant and about to give birth. At that time, the old man was furious. He demanded that his daughter abort the pregnancy immediately. Otherwise, he would cut off all ties with her. The old man knew that his daughter's boyfriend wouldn't bring her happiness. But when he returned home from work, he found his daughter dead. The man didn't understand why the driver had said those words. He had only casually offered comfort. But when the man regained consciousness, he had been captured and tied up on the mountain. The police had located the man's phone. Officer Baek happened to be nearby. Officer Baek rushed deep into the forest. The man, pale-faced, struggled to get up, couldn't understand why the taxi driver wanted to kill him. The old man did as before. He untied the ropes binding the man's feet so he could escape, while he himself held a bow and arrow. He was like a hunter pursuing his prey. He wanted the man to feel the same despair his daughter felt before she died. Suddenly, Officer Baek rushed out and pushed the old man to the ground. Then, Officer Baek urged the man to run fast. The man turned around and saw a beam of light. Ignoring whether his rescuer lived or died, he ran towards the target. By the time Officer Baek removed the handcuffs, the old man had already escaped. He even stabbed Officer Baek with a knife. The man found a beacon of hope, but he also found a scarecrow that instilled fear. Desperate, the man knelt on the ground. He didn't know how to escape this dangerous forest. What made him even more desperate was that the old man had caught up. The old man asked if the man thought that light could save his life. He said that his daughter was his life. When his daughter was murdered in the street, many people stood around watching, but no one intervened to prevent the tragedy. Therefore, all those people should be buried alongside the girl. The one who deserves to die the most is the person who filmed the video. At that time, he only cared about whether his video would go viral or not. He didn't care about the girl's life at all. When the old man was about to shoot the man, Ji-hun arrived with the police. Ji-hun ordered the old man to put down his weapon, otherwise he would be shot dead on the spot. Unexpectedly, the old man was not afraid of death. He said, "Those who disregard other people's lives are animals and don't deserve to live." Suddenly, something flew down from above. The old man regained his focus and immediately attacked. Unexpectedly, it was just a piece of clothing. The police seized the opportunity and subdued the old man. Afterwards, Officer Baek limped out of the forest. The old man said that after turning off his daughter's video that day, he regretted it, but he never imagined his daughter would be so brutally murdered. When the old man saw his daughter desperately kneeling on the ground, begging passersby for help, his heart ached unbearably. His daughter's pleas were ignored. If only they had intervened, his daughter might still be alive. Instead, they heartlessly watched her leave this world. The old man said he regretted bringing his daughter daughter to the city. This place was even more terrifying and frightening than the remote countryside. Ji-hun listened, lost in thought. If he were the girl's father, he didn't know if he would resent those who just stood by and watched. But Ji-hun would never seek revenge, because everyone has the right to choose for themselves. A girl named Harry went missing at kindergarten. Harry's mother thought that another parent had already picked up her child, but when Harry's mother opened the video she had just received, she saw her daughter in a strange place, undressing. Then, Harry was forced to wear a red dress. The mother was so frightened that she fainted. The police quickly arrived at her house to conduct an investigation. Harry's grandfather was the police chief. Soon, the police found the location where the video was recorded. They then found the clothes Harry had changed out of in front of the bathroom door. The mother was extremely worried about her daughter's safety. However, she refused to release the video to help find her daughter, fearing that this would anger the kidnappers. Therefore, the police chief assigned the case to Ji-hun and the special investigation team. Ji-hun analyzed that the kidnapper must have a particular preference. This person wanted to transform Harry into the appearance they desired. That's why the kidnapper demanded Harry wear the red dress. But Harry didn't resist at all. Officer Beck told Minho that the kidnapping case was his biggest headache. Not only did they have to apprehend the kidnappers, but they also had to be wary of them killing the hostage. Harry's teacher said she was trying to mediate a fight between two students, but when she turned around, Harry was gone. Officer Bake watched the CCTV footage and counted the time. He discovered that Harry had disappeared within 15 minutes, hidden from view. However, the kidnapper was incredibly clever. This road had no surveillance system, so he must have hidden in a corner and lured Harry to him. But how could Harry have been completely unsuspecting of a stranger? Unless the kidnapper was someone very familiar to Harry. This was truly unusual. When the police zoomed in on the kindergarten's surveillance camera footage, they saw Harry running and laughing. Ji-hun took the photo that Officer Bake gave him. He saw Harry happily running towards the kidnapper. Moreover, there seemed to be something in Harry's school bag. At this point, Jae-ri also noticed something amiss. Because Harry suffered from respiratory allergies, even though she loved dogs, her mother didn't allow her to keep one. Her mother only allowed Harry to buy many stuffed animals, but what struck everyone as strange was that Harry's favorite Dalmatian stuffed dog was missing. This indicated that Harry had taken her beloved stuffed dog and planned to run away from home. Officer Bike suspected that this was someone Harry knew. However, Ji-hun's intuition told him that the kidnapper was a psychopath, and his target was Harry. Furthermore, Harry seemed very eager to leave the house. Harry's mother understood why Ji-hun had analyzed the situation that way. Because the mother was always busy all day, Harry was often left alone. Pedophiles often choose such targets. Ji-hun's words brought a sigh of relief to Harry's mother, as it meant her daughter was safe. Unexpectedly, Ji-hun completely refuted this. He said that if Harry knew the kidnapper's intentions, she would definitely refuse his demands. That would be when Harry would be in danger. Harry's mother was horrified upon hearing this. Ji-hun advised the mother to make the case public, as it would increase Harry's chances of survival. However, the mother didn't want to gamble with her daughter's life, so she resolutely refused to make the case public. At the same time, Harry's mother was also dissatisfied with the progress of the Special Task Force's rescue. At that moment, the phone at home rang. The kidnapper said Harry was with him. The mother was extremely agitated. Jae-ri reminded the mother to ask to hear her daughter's voice, but the kidnapper said Harry was safe and sound. He demanded that Harry's mother prepare 3 billion won within 3 hours. He also warned the mother not to call the police. After stating his demands, the kidnapper hung up. At this point, Harry's mother's emotions completely collapsed. She screamed, telling all the police to leave. This kidnapper was probably not a psychopath, but his purpose was extortion. Harry's mother caressed a photo of her daughter from before she was born. She had recorded every moment of her daughter's growth. At this moment, Harry's mother was filled with regret. If only she had gone to pick up her daughter, perhaps things wouldn't have turned out this way. However, Harry's mother didn't have that much money, so she knelt down in front of Harry's grandfather. He was the only one who could help her save her daughter. Harry's mother had always been strong in the face of adversity, but now she knelt before her father-in-law to save her daughter. At this moment, Ji-hun couldn't understand why the kidnapper only called after 18 hours. The technicians had detected the phone signal. It traveled through 3 signal towers at a speed of 80 kilometers per hour. Through the coverage area, Ji-hun assumed the kidnapper was on the subway. The police all knew they had encountered a master. This time, Officer Baek contacted his friend, an antique collector. He specialized in using things that were nearing their expiration date. When he heard the kidnapper change his voice, he recognized that the kidnapper was using an old-style Soviet telephone. However, restoring the original sound would take a certain amount of time. The voice was definitely that of a man. The accent suggested he was around 30 years old. A friend told Officer Bake that there was a detective who specialized in collecting these old phones for anonymous calls. But when Officer Bake entered the detective's office, he found everything had been ransacked. The detective had been chased by creditors and had fled. However, Officer Bake found a box full of old phones in a drawer. Officer Bake also recognized the detective's appearance. At this point, the kidnappers called a second time. Harry's mother followed the kidnappers' instructions and took 3 billion won in cash to the meeting place. The police had arranged for surveillance, but they didn't expect Harry's mother to escape on her bicycle. She threw the suitcase containing the 3 billion won into the sea. Before the two officers could react, a speedboat suddenly appeared on the water. Then, the person on the speedboat retrieved the suitcase and disappeared from the police's sight. Harry's mother felt completely drained of energy. She sat down on the boat, hoping the kidnapper would get the money and release her daughter. But Ji-hun began to suspect that Harry's mother and the kidnapper might be working together. Initially, Ji-hun found Harry's mother to be normal. She had taken 3 billion won in cash from her father-in-law and put it in a suitcase. The police had also placed a tracking device inside the suitcase. After Harry's mother looked at her phone at the transaction point, she hurriedly cycled to the dock. The police officers lying in ambush didn't dare act rashly. They could only watch her board the yacht. However, Ji-hun suspected that the kidnapper would use a speedboat to avoid police surveillance, so Ji-hun had arranged for someone to board the yacht beforehand. Jae-ri looked around but didn't spot anyone suspicious. But after Harry's mother threw the suitcase into the sea, Ji-hun immediately felt that this kidnapping was not simple at all, because from the beginning, Harry's mother had refused the suitcase offered by the police. Later, she received a message about the transaction on the yacht. This showed that she knew the kidnapper's plan beforehand. The suitcase was made of waterproof material and was quite large. The air inside would increase buoyancy. Moreover, the tracking device on the suitcase was quickly removed. At this moment, Harry's grandfather arrived. He felt that the kidnappers demanded 3 billion won in cash because Harry's mother knew the balance in his bank account. Harry's grandfather also suspected that this was a kidnapping orchestrated by Harry's mother. However, Jae-ri argued that maternal love cannot be faked. Since Harry's disappearance, the remorse and pain in the mother's heart have been evident. At this moment, Harry's mother frantically entered the bedroom. Officer Bake called Ji-hun to inform him that he had just discovered a clue among the detective's phone records. Among them was a number that had called after the kidnapping occurred. When Officer Bake called that number back, the person who answered was Harry's mother. Ji-hun was shocked to hear this. He went outside and told Harry's grandfather that the caller was a member of his team. This enraged Harry's grandfather. However, Ji-hun decided not to act rashly to prevent the kidnapper from harming Harry. Harry's mother suddenly left the house. The police, using the signal, located her whereabouts. But when they entered the house, Harry's mother was unconscious in a pool of blood. On the sofa was Harry's favorite Dalmatian dog. Officer Bake discovered that the perpetrator had fled without even changing Harry's shoes. Officer Bake speculated that the kidnappers might have killed the victim because the money wasn't divided equally. This made Ji-hun feel uneasy, as the kidnappers might have eliminated their accomplices and then killed the hostage as well. Currently, the police have no leads to track him down, but first, they need to find the landlord, Kang Jin. Officer Bake decided to start investigating with the detective. The police discovered that a week earlier, the detective had transferred 5 million won into an account, but strangely, the recipient returned 800 won. Officer Bake immediately realized this was a common trick of the gang leader. They did this just for good luck. Officer Bake and Ji-hun immediately went to the harbor. They found the detective preparing to escape by sea. The man in the baseball cap saw them and quickly ran away. At this moment, Jae-ri discovered a bottle of medicine in the kitchen and found several bottles of white liquid in the refrigerator. Jae-ri immediately handed them over to the laboratory staff. Simultaneously, Jae-ri also found Harry's diary in her mother's bag. However, the contents were all Harry's complaints about her mother. Her mother was often busy and forgot her appointments with Harry, which made Harry very sad. But since Kang Jin arrived with the little dog, Harry suddenly became happier. Harry wrote that she didn't know why Kang Jin called her Happy Girl. Jae-ri suddenly remembered Harry's birthday diary, which also mentioned this nickname. Moreover, the handwriting on it was clearly not Harry's mother's. Jae-ri began to suspect that Kang Jin was Harry's biological mother. In another room, Ji-hun saw many baby supplies, but the investigation revealed that Kang Jin was not married and had no children. When Ji-hun picked up the dog from the floor, he saw a package of asthma medication for children. Ji-hun and Jae-ri immediately went to the pharmacy next door to inquire. The female pharmacist was very impressed with Kang Jin. At that time, Kang Jin seemed extremely worried. Kang Jin asked the pharmacist to prescribe some cough medicine medicine and skin cream. The user of the medication was a 7-year-old girl who had a severe allergy to animal fur. The female pharmacist also became worried after hearing this. The pharmacist said that this type of medication could be life-threatening. At this point, forensic Dr. Choi told Ji-hun that the bottle of medicine was an antidepressant, and the bottles of liquid were Kang Jin's breast milk. It had been kept for up to 6 years, and it was very likely that Harry had drunk all of the milk. After Harry's mother was given emergency treatment, she regained consciousness, but the mother didn't want to say anything. The mother didn't even care about her daughter's life. After Officer Baek apprehended the detective, he immediately contacted Ji-hun. Officer Baek questioned the detective and knew that Harry's mother had discovered she was infertile. Therefore, 6 years prior, she had used the detective to buy back Kang Jin's daughter. Afterward, Harry's mother tried to reconcile with her husband and even gained the approval of her father-in-law. However, Kang Jin had recently learned of her daughter's whereabouts from the detective. After knowing about this through her daughter's diary, Harry's mother contacted the detective, hoping to speak with her daughter. However, the private detective devised a plan to kidnap Harry. He also promised Kang Jin that he would be allowed to stay with Harry for a few days, threatening to reveal Harry's secret if she refused. Having no other choice, Harry's mother agreed. The mother said that although Harry wasn't her biological daughter, after her husband's death, her daughter was the only thing she had left, and Harry's grandfather also loved Harry very much. Harry's mother didn't want to tell the police the truth because she feared that if her claim of not being Harry's biological mother was revealed, she would lose custody of her child. Harry's mother claimed she was stabbed by Kang Jin. However, Harry's mother wasn't worried about her daughter because Kang Jin was Harry's biological mother. But Harry's mother didn't know that after Kang Jin gave birth to Harry, she suffered from postpartum depression and paranoia. Although Kang Jin tried to have more children many times, she failed, which is why she decided to take Harry back. Jae-ri mentioned that Harry's diary stated that her greatest wish was to visit the zoo. Finally, thanks to clues provided by the locals, the police found Kang Jin. But when they arrived, Kang Jin had already taken Harry to the rooftop. Jae-ri was worried about Kang Jin's unstable mood. Jae-ri advised Kang Jin to come down quickly. Kang Jin said she just wanted to be alone with her daughter for a while, but Harry seemed very ill. When Kang Jin saw her daughter having more and more difficulty breathing, she suggested that Harry was weak because she hadn't been breastfed. Kang Jin told Jae-ri not to worry too much because she had plenty of breast milk in her refrigerator. Suddenly, Kang Jin's emotions began to spiral out of control. She even suspected someone had come to abduct her child. While Jae-ri didn't know what to do, Harry's mother arrived at the scene with her injuries. Kang Jin didn't expect that even such a deep stab wound couldn't take Harry's mother's life. Kang Jin did this because she had heard Harry say that her mother never took her out to play and that her mother often got angry with her. Harry's mother, with one hand tending to her wound, sincerely apologized to Kang Jin. She felt she hadn't been a good mother. She had promised her daughter many things but failed to keep them. Because she was so lonely, she had made up an excuse to find a father for her daughter. After dating several men, she even considered abandoning her daughter. Meanwhile, Kang Jin was Harry's biological mother. For all these years, Kang Jin had always remembered her daughter. This was completely different from what Harry's mother had done. Harry's mother felt truly ashamed. Kang Jin hadn't expected this. Harry's mother continued in a low voice, saying that if Harry could return to her side, she would cherish her daughter even more. She would become a mother who would make Harry happy. After saying this, Harry's mother couldn't bear it anymore and collapsed to the ground unconscious. Her sincerity deeply moved Kang Jin. Kang Jin gently stroked her daughter. Then, she handed the stroller to Jae-ri. Kang Jin decided to give up on Harry because she knew she wasn't a good enough mother. Kang Jin only hoped Harry's mother could keep her promise and not let Harry suffer anymore. Jung-in had lost all her money. She intended to borrow another 100 million won to continue gambling, but Dusan demanded that Jung-in use her body to exchange for a chance to borrow money. After saying this, Dusan walked over to Jung-in. He thought Jung-in would obediently serve him, but Jung-in angrily slapped him. Then, ashamed, Jung-in ran outside, but after a short while, she returned. She decided to give up her dignity just to get money for gambling. After each time Jung-in was abused by Dusan and his younger brother, she felt extremely nauseated because Jung-in didn't want to be toyed with by them anymore. She borrowed money from strangers to pay the interest this month, but the other party was also in debt, so she couldn't help Jung-in. After Jung-in's husband found out, he tried his best to pay off his wife's debts, even selling the clinic he had worked so hard to build. From that day on, guilt weighed heavily on Jung-in's heart, causing her mental state to become unstable. However, one thing completely devastated Jung-in. She was pregnant, but the father wasn't her husband. Moreover, Jung-in contracted a terrible disease. She felt she had no right to live anymore. She felt felt every moment of her life was incredibly painful. However, Jungin's husband still loved her deeply. He hoped they could start over. Even so, Jungin apologized and left her husband forever. 6 years later, Dusan's entire family of 3 tragically died at home. Neighbors recounted that this morning, when they entered the villa, they saw a man frantically running away with a bag. The suspect was identified as Kyung-jun, a former Special Forces soldier. Kyung-jun had lost all his assets in a single night at a casino. Furthermore, he had stolen 4 billion won in cash from the casino, yet still lost it all. Despite this, Kyung-jun remained unchanged. Police officer Baek was furious upon knowing of this. Initially, Officer Baek tried to mitigate Kyung-jun's sentence, but unexpectedly, Kyung-jun murdered the entire Dusan family for money to silence them. From the crime scene, the police could see that the perpetrator had acted ruthlessly towards the entire Dusan family. Ji-hun felt that even if Kyung-jun had killed for money, he didn't need to make the scene so horrific. Investigative information indicated that the suspect and the victims had no prior relationship. Forensic experts informed Ji-hun that the killer murdered Dusan about 2 hours after Dusan's wife and child died. Although the wounds on the bodies looked messy, each had a fatal wound below the neck. Ji-hun analyzed that the killer was likely very professional. Furthermore, the killer deliberately made Dusan witness the tragic deaths of his wife and child. That night, Ji-hun went to the villa. He saw a wine rack at the scene. What surprised Ji-hun was that most of the famous wines there were fake. Only the bottle the killer took out was real. Given Kyung-jun's gambling addiction, he couldn't possibly be leisurely studying wine. Therefore, Ji-hun suspected someone else was in the room that night, but Officer Baek insisted that Kyung-jun was the killer. He could abandon his wife and children for gambling, so murder was too easy for him. The killer deliberately murdered Dusan's family in front of Dusan. This murder was a revenge killing. Ji-hun felt that Officer Baek's reasoning stemmed from his initial regret for believing Kyung-jun, which led to the tragic deaths of a family of 3. The 2 officers differed in their analysis of the case, so they decided to rely on their own clues to track down the killer. Officer Baek contacted the one-eyed man. Officer Baek asked him to observe if any of the recent smugglers resembled the person in the picture. Then, Officer Baek checked the surveillance cameras. After the incident, he discovered Kyung-jun wearing black. However, Kyung-jun appeared at the second intersection. This stretch of road, which should only take 3 minutes to travel, took him 20 minutes. During this time, the only place Kyung-jun could go was the private detective agency. Initially, Detective Hwang denied meeting Kyung-jun, but under pressure from Officer Baek, Detective Hwang had no choice but to admit that Kyung-jun had been there. Kyung-jun had paid Detective Hwang a large sum of money to investigate someone, the murderer of Dusan. Officer Baek felt Kyung-jun was trying to conceal the truth. Officer Baek had witnessed firsthand that after Kyung-jun was released from prison, he didn't go home to visit his wife and children, but instead went to a casino. However, Kyung-jun was very resistant to investigation. The police repeatedly intercepted Kyung-jun's phone signals, but they still couldn't find anything. Therefore, Officer Baek decided to monitor Detective Hwang. After receiving the money, Detective Hwang was obligated to work. Otherwise, Kyung-jun threatened to kill Detective Hwang. Detective Hwang handed Dusan's loan shark ledger to Kyung-jun. At this moment, Dusan's younger brother suddenly appeared. Detective Hwang knew he couldn't provoke Kyung-jun, so to avoid trouble, he contacted Dusan's brother first. To avenge his brother, Duseok spread false rumors that anyone who found Kyung-jun and reported it would receive a large reward, but no one dared to secretly oppose Kyung-jun. Duseok assured them he would make Kyung-jun die right there. Officer Baek chased after them and heard noises inside. When Officer Baek rushed in, he found Duseok lying in a pool of blood on the floor. At the police station, Duseok said he wanted revenge for his brother, but he didn't expect his opponent's fighting skills to be so formidable. Officer Baek then asked Detective Hwang why he had encountered Kyung-jun that day. Detective Hwang stammered that Kyung-jun wanted to use the debt ledger to investigate the murderer of Dusan. This statement infuriated Officer Baek, who believed the detective was talking nonsense. However, Ji-hun felt that Detective Hwang wasn't lying. Officer Baek had been wrong from the start. Kyung-jun wasn't the murderer of Dusan's family. He was merely a scapegoat. Moreover, Kyung-jun was now investigating the real killer. This greatly annoyed Officer Baek. While Officer Baek and Ji-hun were arguing, Kyung-jun suddenly called. Knowing that Officer Baek wouldn't let him off the hook, Kyung-jun told the police the whole truth about what happened that night. The doctor pressed the video recording button on his phone. He hung the bag containing the poison on the IV stand. Then, the doctor slowly carried Soa into the room. Seoa's mother begged the other party to spare her daughter, saying that the one at fault was someone else, and Seoa was completely innocent. Sunho just smirked after hearing this. 6 years ago, when Sunho and his wife were on vacation, they met Kyung-jun and his wife. They had a pleasant time together together when they first met. But then, Kyungjun insisted on taking them to a casino to gamble. Jung-in was moved by this. From that day on, Jung-in became addicted to gambling. Not only did she secretly borrow money at exorbitant interest rates from her husband, but she was also repeatedly raped by Dusan and his younger brother because she couldn't pay the interest. Finally, because Jung-in contracted HIV, she was ashamed and ended her own life. The beginning of this nightmare was their acquaintance with Kyungjun and his wife. When Kyungjun saw his wife and child motionless on the screen, he was so desperate that he collapsed to the ground. Kyungjun never expected that the person in the villa would be Sunho. A few days earlier, Kyungjun had lost all his money, but then he suddenly received a call. The caller asked Kyungjun to go to the casino to help someone place a bet. Kyungjun was paid 1 million won. Kyungjun immediately agreed. So, Kyungjun went to the villa alone. He placed the knife the caller had requested on the dining table. Thinking the man in front of him was the owner of the villa, Kyungjun casually struck up a conversation. He said that gambling had cost him everything. Unexpectedly, the man asked Kyungjun to end his own life. Sunho deliberately made Kyungjun leave many fingerprints in the room. Then, Sunho placed a bet on the table and said that someone would help him when Kyungjun arrived at the casino. However, Kyungjun waited all day but no one came to find him. Finally, Kyungjun took the money and returned to the villa. But Kyungjun discovered that Dusan's entire family had met a tragic end there. Kyungjun gathered all the cash and fled the scene. But Kyungjun didn't expect Dusuk to be hunting him down. Kyungjun reported everything to Ji-hun. Kyungjun was certain that the man who died in the villa that day was not the person he had met. Currently, Kyungjun is the prime suspect being hunted down. If Kyungjun wants to prove his innocence, he should confess. But Kyungjun knows the police only want to arrest him to sentence him, so he must personally catch the person who harmed him. Kyungjun also stated that after he entered the room, he saw the safe was open. Therefore, he had amassed 5 billion won inside. Police officer Baek, however, believed Kyungjun was lying. Kyungjun was the real culprit. Kyungjun knew that explaining was useless, so he abruptly hung up the phone. Police officer Baek speculated that after Kyungjun forced Dusan's family to hand over the money, he murdered them to silence them. Furthermore, no safe was found at the scene. However, Ji-hun felt that Kyungjun wasn't lying. At this time, Minho received news that before Dusan was killed, he had gone to the hospital for HIV treatment. But Minho discovered something even more interesting. Duseok's wife and Dusan's wife had the same disease. Ji-hun began to suspect that Duseok might have discovered his brother's affair with his wife, which is why he murdered his brother's entire family. Meanwhile, after reviewing the post-crime footage, Officer Baek noticed that Duseok seemed to be searching for something. He returned to the villa, where he discovered a speaker cover that had been installed upside down. Upon opening it, he found a safe inside. From debt collection records, Officer Baek realized that Dusan actually possessed 5 billion won. Therefore, Duseok's search for Kyungjun wasn't for revenge for his brother, but rather to locate the 5 billion won. At the same time, Hun arrived at Duseok's house. Suddenly, a blood-soaked man stumbled out. This man was Duseok, the very person Ji-hun was looking for. Officer Baek arrived shortly afterward. Duseok claimed that Kyungjun had harmed him. The police found a photograph on Duseok's person. Ji-hun felt that the girl in the photograph was definitely connected to the case. Therefore, they decided to go to Dusan's lending company. There, Ji-hun discovered many nude photos in a notebook. This showed that Dusan was a perverted lecher. Dusan exploited usurious lending to satisfy his personal desires. Thus, the culprit was most likely a family member of these victims. The breakthrough in the case lay in the photos of Duseok. At this time, police officer Baek received another report. The bar owner said she saw someone who looked very much like Kyungjun. That person told her to call the phone number on a business card, and if a woman answered, she should hang up. But when Kyungjun saw a man answer, immediately answered the phone. Kyungjun suspected that this man had harmed him. Police officer Baek instructed his subordinates to investigate the owner of the phone number. Ji-hun sought out the woman in the photo. The woman said that the girl sitting with her looked quite well off, but because of her gambling addiction, she had fallen deep into debt. Eventually, she became a tool to satisfy the desires of Dusan and his younger brother. Although her husband later paid off her debts, she still chose to end her own life. Ji-hun asked what her husband did for a living. The woman replied that he was a doctor. Ji-hun immediately went to Sunho's old clinic, which was now a pile of ruins. Minho found a surgical kit in the trash can. This gave Ji-hun a bad feeling. Ji-hun informed police officer Baek that the murderer of Dusan's entire family was likely Sunho. Police officer Baek also traced the call to Kyungjun at the bar to Sunho. However, Jae-ri still couldn't understand why Sunho would blame Kyungjun. Moreover, Moreover, why did Sunho insist on calling Kyungjun to the villa? Ji-hun asked Jae-ri to quickly investigate the relationship between the two. Meanwhile, Minho had found a new clue. Sunho had rented a car before the incident. Furthermore, a witness reported seeing a woman and a young girl in the car. The police quickly found the abandoned car on the side of the road. The odometer showed 40 kilometers, but the distance from the rental company to here was only 20 kilometers. So where did Sunho drive the remaining 20 kilometers? Ji-hun sat down and felt the tires. Ji-hun discovered they were covered in cow dung. Ji-hun told Minho to quickly check if there were any nearby livestock farms. It's possible Sunho had secretly observed the two arrested individuals nearby. Jae-ri noticed that the background in the photo of Sunho and his wife looked very familiar. She rushed to Kyungjun's house. The two pictures not only showed the same location, but also the same date. Behind the picture was a note. "Thanks to you, we lost everything. This was the first time my wife gambled, and she's heavily in debt." After reading it, Jae-ri quickly informed Ji-hun that 6 years ago, Sunho had coincidentally met Kyungjun. Later, Kyungjun took Sunho and his wife to a casino, but that day, the nightmare for Sunho and his wife began. Ji-hun still believed that Kyungjun's wife and child were alive. Sunho had called Kyungjun because he wanted Kyungjun to witness his wife and child die right before his eyes. At this moment, Sunho was drinking wine, waiting for the man who had harmed his wife to end his own life. A short while later, Kyungjun arrived at the house with a knife. This was where Kyungjun and Sunho first met. When Kyungjun saw his wife and child motionless on the screen, he broke down and asked why Sunho was so heartless. Then, Kyungjun violently attacked his opponent, stabbing Sunho multiple times. However, Sunho didn't dodge and even smiled. This completely drove Kyungjun insane. At that moment, Officer Baek rushed into the room. Officer Baek saw Kyungjun collapse to the ground and also saw Kyungjun's wife and child dead on the screen. This scene filled Officer Baek with grief. If Officer Baek had arrived a few minutes earlier, perhaps this tragedy wouldn't have happened. Meanwhile, Ji-hun found the house, where Kyungjun's wife and child were being held captive. However, Ji-hun and his team arrived a step too late. The two people in the room were no longer moving. Unexpectedly, Sewa on the bed suddenly woke up. It turned out that Sunho had only given her sleeping pills. Sunho, barely alive, told Kyungjun that he must cherish this chance at life. Before leaving the wooden house, he spontaneously asked Kyungjun's wife why she was living such a miserable life and refusing to leave. The woman replied that she had given her first love to her husband and would never leave him, even though her husband couldn't escape his gambling addiction. Kyungjun's wife prayed every day that he would overcome his addiction and return to his wife and children. This reminded Sunho of his wife when she was alive. He also remembered his own past hope for her return. Therefore, Sunho decided to let go of his hatred. Sunho went alone to find his wife in the afterlife. Ji-hun told Kyungjun that although Kyungjun had killed Do Seo because Kyungjun was forced by Sunho at the time, Ji-hun would try to ask the court to reduce the sentence. Ji-hun also hoped that after Kyungjun was released from prison, he would change so that his family could live a peaceful life. Man dragged a girl into a narrow alley. When he was about to commit the heinous act, the girl begged him to hurry up because her child needed medicine. The man was stunned. When he saw the girl clutching the packet of medicine in her hand, he withdrew his evil hand. The young mother's words extinguished the lust in his heart. The girl only wanted to live, otherwise her 1-year-old child would die of illness at home. When she heard the sound of a knife falling to the ground, she tried to move forward without daring to look back. The girl only hoped to leave here safely. She didn't know that her courage had deeply moved the killer. Seeing the girl stop, he quickly hid in an alley. If the assassin revealed his identity, the organization would certainly not spare him. But the girl turned back, bowed, and said thank you. This statement moved the assassin. For so many years, no one had ever thanked him. At that moment, he felt a little reluctant to harm the girl. 6 months later, the girl saw strange paintings in the park. The figures in the paintings seemed to be without eyes, but it was this very imperfection that attracted her. So, the girl's whole family prepared to leave a memento there. But the girl didn't know that the artist of the paintings was the man who had tried to assault her that night. The man bowed his head, afraid that the girl would recognize him, but this time, he felt extremely satisfied. He decided to protect the girl for life. So the girl's entire family had eyes painted on them. 4 years later, the girl's husband died in an accident at home. But as soon as Ji-hun looked, he realized this wasn't an accident. The position of the sofa clearly indicated the killer had been sitting there observing. The victim had suffocated in the sauna. Forensic expert Choi stated that the temperature in the room was very high, causing the victim's skin to crack and tear. Choi also discovered pufferfish venom in the victim's body, a substance that can cause coma. However, the puzzling injection site was the victim's ankle. Jae-ri went to the victim's lawyer's office. The secretary secretary, said the couple's relationship was very bad, and the husband was terrified of his wife. Later, Jae-ri went to the victim's house. Won-jin was completely indifferent to her husband's death. This led Jae-ri to believe the secretary's words were true. Won-jin didn't even know that her husband always locked the door whenever he left the house. This showed how terrible their marriage was. There was almost no communication between them. After the police investigation, it was discovered that Won-jin was pregnant for marriage. However, her mother-in-law strongly opposed their marriage. As a result, 6 months later, while walking down the street, Won-jin's mother-in-law was struck on the head and died. Not long after Won-jin and her husband got married, their daughter drowned while attending summer camp at school. Afterwards, the irresponsible principal was thrown into the river. To this day, the perpetrators of these 2 cases remain unsolved. Ji-hun discovered that the people Won-jin hated were all murdered for no apparent reason. Won-jin's recently deceased husband was also murdered, so Ji-hun called Won-jin to the police station. Won-jin asked Ji-hun if she suspected her of being the murderer. Won-jin knew exactly how the 4 police wanted to question her. The other party had already considered Won-jin a suspect, but when Ji-hun presented her husband's will, Won-jin couldn't help but show a look of astonishment. Her husband had donated all his assets to society. Moreover, if he died, an autopsy and investigation would be necessary. All the people Won-jin hated were dead. First, her mother-in-law, who didn't accept her as her daughter-in-law, then the kindergarten principal, and now her husband had met the same fate. This reminded Won-jin of what her husband had once said. He said that all the people Won-jin hated were dead. 3 years ago, after the kindergarten principal died, the relationship between the 2 of them began to crack. Won-jin even suspected that she had murdered his mother. Won-jin didn't want to get involved with police anymore, as she couldn't explain these coincidences. Won-jin decided to donate her husband's body. If he had loved someone like that, Won-jin would do everything to fulfill his wish. After saying this, Won-jin angrily left. Ji-hun asked Won-jin if she would be happy now if all those people were dead. Won-jin retorted, asking Ji-hun if he would be happy if the person he hated died. Although the police suspected Won-jin, she actually had evidence proving her absence from the scene. When the crime occurred, Won-jin was in another city, Minho. Extracted images of car the victim drove home that day. Ji-hun suspected killer ambushed the victim in the garage, then used a syringe to inject the victim in the leg. Afterward, killer dragged the victim into a room. When Won-jin's husband woke up, he was locked in the sauna. Soon after, police came to Won-jin's house to investigate. Ji-hun felt killer was very familiar with the victim's actions. He might be hiding nearby. The building opposite is the best place to hide. This moment, Jae-ri discovered paintings there, and from the style, they were very similar to the paintings at Won-jin's house. Moreover, these paintings all depicted a woman. This proves that someone was always watching Won-jin. Through the information provided by the landlord, the police traced a man named Kang-ho. He was a member of an assassination organization in Southeast Asia, but the police couldn't figure out Kang-ho's motive for the murders. When Jae-ri returned to Won-jin's house, she found a collection of paintings related to model Liani. This artist was very strange. Before he understood the inner feelings of his model, he wouldn't paint her eyes. The only person whose eyes he painted was his wife, Jenny. Jae-ri suspects that Won-jin is the artist's Jenny. Meanwhile, police officer Baek receives news that Kang-ho has disobeyed orders from the organization, leading to a large influx of people attempting to hunt him down. Ji-hun wants to know where Kang-ho is, but Won-jin doesn't understand what Ji-hun is saying. After knowing the truth, Won-jin is utterly astonished. It turns out that for all these years, someone has been silently by her side. Won-jin hopes the police will quickly apprehend the person who harmed her family. Ji-hun gives Won-jin a piece of paper. Kang-ho left outside the door. It only says the old place. Police officer Baek had previously assumed Kang-ho wouldn't appear. Won-jin was everything to Kang-ho. His feelings for her were incredibly deep. Ji-hun deploys a large police force to surround the park. Meanwhile, Won-jin is heartbroken, looking at the happy memories that once belonged to her. Suddenly, Won-jin remembers something. Then, she picks up the suspect's photo. Won-jin suspected that the location on the piece of paper was the place where she was almost harmed 5 years ago. So, Won-jin immediately drove away from home. Jae-ri hurriedly informed Ji-hun of this news. Won-jin slowly walked into the alley ahead. This was the place where Won-jin was almost humiliated 5 years ago. Sure enough, Kang-ho was standing there. When Won-jin turned around, she finally saw his face. Kang-ho composed himself. Then, heartbroken, he told Won-jin that he would no longer be able to protect her. But Won-jin angrily said that every time someone left her, she would become even more unhappy. Now, even the right to be happy was being taken away from her. Those words stunned Kang-ho. The belief that Kang-ho considered noble suddenly became meaningless. It turned out that Won-jin was not happy at all when Kang-ho protected her. Kang-ho sadly turned and walked away. He knew the person in front of him wanted to kill him, but he still advanced, because ever since Won-jin abandoned him, his life had lost its meaning. But what pleased Kang-ho was that, in his final moments, he could die in front of the woman he loved. Ji-hun ran up and grabbed Kang-ho. Then, Jae-ri showed Kang-ho's portrait to Won-jin. She said that someone like Kang-ho didn't understand life, so naturally he didn't understand love either. Every time Kang-ho saw a woman suffering, he felt suffering too. His flawed character made him think he could use his own way to bring happiness to others. But Won-jin would never forgive Kang-ho. She would forever hate the man who ruined her life. Although in this girl's eyes, the world was black, she always believed that the world was pure. The girl didn't know that every time she changed clothes, a group of men were secretly watching her. One day, when she was thirsty, a waiter brought her a glass of beer. The waiter also said she could call him anytime if she needed anything. The man's thoughtfulness impressed her, so she gave him a bottle of skin lotion. But when the other men found out about this, each of them bought a bottle of the same lotion. When the girl smelled the familiar scent of the lotion, she thought it was the waiter, so she willingly got intimate with him. But later, the sensitive girl realized that although the scent was the same, each time she was intimate with a different man. When the waiter found out about this, he sought out the men to demand justice for the girl. But they beat him brutally. Sua, terrified, hid in a corner, not daring to speak. From that day on, her songs became increasingly mournful. That afternoon, Sua had just finished recording a song. She noticed the surroundings were eerily quiet. It turned out that 5 people had died in the bar, and their death postures were almost identical. Ji-hun had been a police officer for many years, but he had never encountered a case like this. 5 adult men were murdered at the same time. There were no signs of a struggle at the scene. The murder weapon was just an electrical wire. One of the victims had been a hired boxer at the bar. Although he had a knife, he was still strangled to death by his opponent. Ji-hun thought the killer must have used some special method to kill 5 people consecutively in a confined space. This killer was not simple at all. Police discovered the back door was blocked by a beer crate, but there were clear drag marks on the ground. Furthermore, fingerprints had been wiped away. If the killer wanted to enter and exit through the back door, they must have had someone inside the bar helping them. At this point, Sua was still terrified. She said she knew nothing, but she had heard hurried footsteps, and the recording equipment showed that someone had indeed entered when the crime occurred. Sua said she felt the breath was very similar to the long-haired man's. Surveillance cameras showed a total of 7 people entering the bar, but only 2 survived. Sua and the long-haired man. He called police. The long-haired man said he came to the bar to find a friend, but at that time, only Sua was singing in the bar. When the long-haired man went to the restroom, he discovered a dead person inside. The long-haired man panicked and ran outside, but he found another body in the kitchen. There was also a knife on the floor. Then, the long-haired man frantically fled the bar. Surveillance cameras showed the long-haired man was only in the bar for about 7 minutes. Ji-hun thought that killing 5 people in 7 minutes was impossible. Furthermore, the long-haired man's footsteps in the recording didn't match the timing, but the bar's entry and exit records showed that all 7 people entered the bar at different times. Therefore, the long-haired man could have killed them one by one. Forensic expert Choi informed Ji-hun that the victims' deaths occurred between 2 p.m. and 4 p.m. The cause of death was strangulation with an electrical wire. However, the victims' pupils constricted to varying degrees, indicating they had seen something terrifying before dying. Currently, the only suspect left was the blind girl, Sua. When Minho examined the scene, he discovered something strange. Minho found many bottles of the same type of lotion in the bar. Even in the corner of the kitchen, Jae-ri noticed something unusual in Sua's dressing room. Someone had installed a shutter on the outside of the wall. Jae-ri rushed out and pulled back the curtain to see. Turned out that the men had taken advantage of Sua's inability to see to peek at her changing clothes. Jae-ri found this behavior utterly disgusting. Jae-ri didn't tell Sua, only saying that the culprit wasn't the long-haired man. This made Sua very disappointed. It turned out that the long-haired man had assaulted Sua more than once. Now when Sua thinks about the scent of the long-haired man, she still feels nauseous. Jae-ri asked why Sua didn't seek help from the police. Sua replied heartbrokenly, because only the long-haired man could help me sing on stage. The police then connected the details to the bottles of skin lotion. The truth was terrifying. Police suspected Sua had been assaulted by more than one person. Minho asked the long-haired man if he frequently assaulted Sua. The long-haired man immediately denied it. Minho reminded him that if police found out he had sexually assaulted a disabled person, his crime would be even more serious. The long-haired man then changed his statement. He said that Sua wanted to sing on the bar stage, so she seduced him. The bar owner then said he would find a management company for Sua and warned the long-haired man not to bother Sua again. Because those people were powerful, the long-haired man was forced to give up on Sua. At this point, forensic expert Choi had a new clue. All 5 victims had signs of electrocution. Just a week earlier, Sua had asked the police for a stun gun. Sua used her disability to cover up her crime. The police, however, underestimated her. Because of it, Ji-hun thought Sua was the culprit, but without concrete evidence, Sua would certainly not confess. Ji-hun asked Sua where the stun gun was. Sua immediately realized police suspected her. She insisted she wasn't the killer. She was just a useless blind person and couldn't possibly have killed 5 people. Ji-hun sent people to search Sua's residence. Later, the long-haired man was summoned to the police station. Ji-hun demanded an explanation for the bottles of skin lotion the victims had. The long-haired man finally confessed that he initially thought the bar owner treated Sua kindly, but then the long-haired man discovered that this group of people were even more despicable than him. They claimed that simply spraying this skin lotion on Sua would make her obedient. So, these people took turns sexually assaulting Sua. Ji-hun wanted to know who discovered this secret and who was the first person to use this skin lotion. The long-haired man said that there used to be a waiter in the bar named Jungkook. He had a very good relationship with Sua, and Sua gave Jungkook a bottle of skin lotion. Later, when Jungkook knew that Sua had been abused, he helped her get justice from those bad guys. But Jungkook was brutally beaten. Sua was afraid of this shameful incident being exposed, so she chose to remain silent. Afterwards, Jungkook thought about Jae-ri, knowing that he had also assaulted Sua. When this case is closed, he will be the next person to be prosecuted. Ji-hun didn't expect another suspect to emerge in this case. Initially, the police didn't believe that a blind girl could kill 5 healthy men. That night, Sua confessed to being the killer. She told the police how she committed crime, but Sua didn't even know how to orient herself. Sua didn't even know what the murder weapon was. Sua almost burst into tears. Ji-hun knew she was protecting the real killer, and that was Jungkook. However, at Jungkook's residence, the police found no signs that he had fled. Many important items of clothing were still in the closet. Sua didn't refute the police's suspicions. She only said that he had been very kind to her. He made her feel a flutter in her heart for the first time. Sua said that when he appeared, her dark world suddenly shone with the light of love. At this moment, a subordinate informed Officer Baek that someone had reported that Jungkook had attacked him. After Officer Baek saw the information about the attack person, he quickly rushed out. The person who reported it was the deceased waiter. So, who was the person in the morgue? Officer Baek rushed into the morgue and asked who Jungkook was. He hastily compared the victim to the photo in his hand. He discovered that the body lying there was Jungkook. Then, Officer Baek reported to Ji-hun that the bar waiter had coincidentally met Jungkook on the street. After the two argued, the waiter knocked him unconscious. To protect Sua, Jungkook went to the bar to kill the man Sua loved. But now, Sua has become the sole suspect. But Ji-hun still couldn't understand. If the two of them liked each other, why would Sua kill him? Suddenly, Ji-hun understood something. Ji-hun entered a locked room and turned off the lights. After turning the lights on and off several times, he figured out how Sua committed crime. When Minho looked at patterned fingerprints in the kitchen, he also understood why everyone suddenly couldn't see anything. Ji-hun asked Minho to pull the circuit breaker in the bar. At this moment, Sua was pacing around in the dressing room. Sua seemed very familiar with everything around her. She moved even more easily than an average person. Although in the light Sua would be at a disadvantage, in the darkness, an average person becomes vulnerable. Turned out that Sua always tended not to be familiar with everything around her. But throughout the 2 hours of crime, every time someone entered the bar, Sua would turn off the lights in the room. The sudden darkness would cause temporary blindness. At that moment, Sua would begin her crime. She used a taser to incapacitate her victim. Then, she used a wire to strangle them. In just a few minutes, Sua could kill a person. Sua understood the habits of these people when they came to the bar, and they had no idea that this girl intended to kill them. However, the most difficult person to deal with was the bar manager. This man was very strong and also had a knife in his hand, but thanks to Sua's keen hearing, she still managed to handle him. Sua just didn't expect that among the people in the room was the man she loved. Afterwards, Sua put on the bar manager's shoes. She deliberately took a few quick steps to record the sound of her footsteps. Finally, Sua returned to the stage to practice singing. Sua pretended nothing had happened. Officer Baek said that Sua moved the beer crate to make police suspect Jungkook. Sua knew that even if police investigated, they wouldn't find any evidence of Jungkook killing anyone. The case would become an unsolved murder case. Jae-ri told Sua that the police had investigated and found Jungkook had no connection to the case. Sua remained calm after hearing this. She said that Jungkook had blamed everything on her. He said that if Sua hadn't used that bottle of skin lotion, she probably wouldn't have been assaulted by those bad guys. Because Sua had been humiliated, she no longer deserved Jungkook's protection. He wanted to kill all those bad guys, but Sua couldn't let Jungkook kill someone because of her. So, Sua pretended not to care about being assaulted, but this only made Jungkook feel more useless. Jungkook was completely incapable of protecting his lover, so he left the bar. Jungkook just walked away from Sua. Sua knew she had lost everything. Perhaps she didn't deserve happiness, but Sua still wanted to know whose footsteps those were. Had the police found the killer? When Jae-ri looked at the girl in front of her, still pretending, she couldn't help but feel heartbroken. This kind-hearted girl had been forced into becoming a bad bad person by society. Ji-hoon decided to have this person impersonate Jungkook. Ji-hoon wanted to help Sua fulfill her last wish. Sua said that since Jungkook left, she had learned to protect herself, but she still couldn't find happiness. Finally, Sua wanted to drink a glass of beer poured by Jungkook. When she touched the other person's wrist and watch, she knew who he was. This man had assaulted Sua many times, so even in death, she would never forget him. When Sua knew that the man she thought was dead was still alive, she understood everything. It turned out that Sua herself had killed the man she loved most. Sua's heart was torn in two, but Sua refused to accept this fate. Why are good people always oppressed and unable to live happily? The woman agreed to spend a night with this man because she wanted to help her husband pay off his billions of won debt. Suddenly, one day, this man was found dead at home, his face covered in acne. The victim was Hwang Min, the director of a securities research and analysis center. Money was just numbers to him. The crime scene had clearly been cleaned up. Although the police found no fingerprints, they did find signs of forced entry on the lot. Later, they found footprints on the floor. Strangely, the perpetrator seemed like a thief, as the places he went were all locations where valuables were kept. This was clearly an experienced burglar. After forensic expert Choi tested the victim's serum, she discovered the victim was carrying a contagious virus. This influenza virus has an incubation period of 1 to 2 days. If the patient is not treated effectively within 48 hours, the mortality rate can be as high as 60%. The police quickly located the burglar's residence, but when they entered the house, Officer Baek was startled and almost jumped up. Officer Baek hadn't expected the virus to be so potent, and the burglar turned out to be an old acquaintance. However, the burglar repeatedly denied killing Hwang Min. Lee San said he had been following the victim for a month. Lee San discovered that Hwang Min was always away from home on Saturdays. Lee San waited a long time for an opportunity, but he didn't expect Hwang Min to be dead in his house. Officer Baek asked Lee San if he had noticed anything unusual this month. Lee San recalled carefully and said that a woman came to the victim's house every Friday night, but after she became intimate with Hwang Min, she would quickly leave. Lee San said he didn't see the victim's cell phone or stock trading tablet. The autopsy report also indicated that the victim died between 8 p.m. and 12 a.m. on Saturdays. His fatal injury was to the head from a severe blow. Furthermore, he was beaten repeatedly, but forensic expert Choi was puzzled by the bruises on the victim's wrists and neck. The bruises appeared because the victim was repeatedly tied up. What annoyed Ji-hoon was that the Department of Epidemiology had confiscated everything in the house immediately after the incident. However, the person in charge explained that this was the only way to expedite the epidemiological investigation and prevent the spread of the infectious disease. But Ji-hoon was dissatisfied because the Department of Epidemiology's actions had made the investigation more difficult. Although both sides had their own opinions, the Department of Epidemiology and the investigation team still cooperated as requested by their superiors. Han also shared the information she had gathered with Ji-hoon. Jae-ri had seen some strange tools in the evidence storage. At this point, Ji-hoon also knew the origin of the bruises on the victim's hands. It turned out that Hwang Min had been a member of a violent hobby club. Hwang Min would either inflict harm or be harmed by others. Later, because Hwang Min nearly committed murder, he was expelled from the club. However, Hwang Min's manager didn't recognize the woman in the portrait. Police also didn't see the woman in the surveillance video. It's possible that on Saturday, this woman sneaked in through the stairs at night. Officer Baek held the suspect's portrait and waited at the hospital. If that woman had been at the victim's house on Friday night, there's a very high chance she would have contracted the disease from the victim. Lee San said that the woman was too cruel. She almost used a golf club to smash the victim's head. Officer Baek heard this and quickly called Lee San back because no golf club was found at the scene. Lee San was certain the murder weapon was next to the body. He saw it with his own eyes when he left. Lee San also said that the bedsheet in the video was missing. This suggests that after committing the crime, perpetrator secretly returned to clean up the scene. Officer Baek was surprised to pick up the portrait because he recognized a familiar face. But before Officer Baek could say anything, the woman collapsed in front of the hospital. Jae-ri discovered the woman's name was Jisoo. She and Hwang Jin were college classmates. They reconnected after Jisoo's husband went bankrupt. Jisoo had kept this a secret from her husband for almost a year. After the Department of Infectious Diseases conduct tests, Officer Baek issued a search warrant for Jisoo's husband's house. The honest man remained silent. Officer Baek asked him where he had been on Saturday night. Jisoo's husband replied that he was driving a taxi at the time and that he didn't know anything else. Jisoo's husband gave a few simple answers and then he was taken away by the disease control center. At this moment, Officer Baek looked out the door and saw the taxi. He immediately realized Jisoo's husband was lying. It turns out there are 3 types of taxis in Korea, but currently only 2 types are allowed to operate. The third type has to cease operations. On that Saturday, Jisoo's husband certainly wasn't driving a taxi, so he was taken to the police station. The police said that on Saturday night, Jisu's husband had driven his car to Hwang Jin's house, so they suspected he was stalking his wife. Jisu's husband knew that lying was useless, so he confessed that, after discovering his wife's infidelity, he lost his mind and then drove away. Ji-hun, of course, didn't believe this, because no man could remain calm in such a situation. However, Jisu's husband still didn't admit to killing Hwang Jin. Meanwhile, Jisu's condition had improved slightly. She was moved to another room. The bruises on her neck were even more noticeable than pimples. Jae-ri asked why Jisoo went to the victim's house every Friday night, but Jisoo didn't answer. Seeing this, Jae-ri continued, saying that on Saturday night, Jisoo's husband had been in front of Hwang Jin's house. Jisoo lost her composure upon hearing this. She couldn't believe her husband knew about it. Therefore, Jisoo confessed to the murder. Jisoo said she stabbed the victim with a knife, then beat him to death with a golf club. But Jisoo refused to say why she killed him. Just as the police were about to close the case, Jisoo's husband said he was the one who killed him. His answer was exactly the same as his wife's. Jisoo's husband also said that after killing the victim, he cleaned up the room, then drove away to dispose of the weapon by the riverbank. The police did indeed find the golf club, which also had Jisoo's husband's fingerprints on it. Officer Baek felt a headache because both of them had confessed to the murder. This was even harder to resolve because they wouldn't admit it. Furthermore, all the evidence at the scene had been destroyed by the infectious disease department. However, Officer Baek thought someone was still not telling the truth. Officer Baek rushed to the hospital to ask Lee San if he had seen the phone and tablet. Lee San knew Officer Baek was serious, so he said he had taken them both. Lee San had given them all to the female officer in the infectious disease department. Because the officer said they contained a virus, she took them away. This surprised Officer Baek somewhat. Ha-eun had never mentioned this, but Lee San had kept one for himself. He had hidden the memory card in the tablet and asked Officer Baek to decrypt password. Police Officer Baek immediately recounted the story to Ji-hun. By the time Ji-hun reached Ha-eun, the Ministry of Health had withdrawn its investigation team. It turned out to be an advanced intelligence system for analyzing securities. Ji-hun explained that all the commercial information contained there was extremely valuable. Someone had abused their power to steal it. Turned out that Ha-eun had initially received benefits from a high-ranking official. She then hastily cleaned up the scene to steal the victim's trade secrets. Ji-hun demanded that Ha-eun quickly return the phone, otherwise she would be prosecuted for concealing evidence. Hearing this, Ha-eun quickly handed over everything. When the police reviewed the recovered video on the phone, they were all astonished and disbelieving. Initially, Hwang Min appeared normal, but then Hwang Min became increasingly deranged. He even stopped treating Jisoo as a human being. The torture Hwang Min inflicted on women had reached a horrific level. At this point, police officer Baek found information that a year ago, Hwang Min had spent 1.5 billion won to pay off Jisoo's husband's debts. Fearing her husband would go to jail, Jisoo sacrificed herself. Since then, Jisoo has worked 3 jobs simultaneously, hoping to pay off the debt as soon as possible, but Hwang Min wouldn't let Jisoo off the hook. He frequently used videos to threaten Jisoo. Jisoo understood that her injuries would eventually reveal the truth to her husband. Therefore, she planned to kill someone, and her husband happened to witness it. After Jisoo fled, her husband cleaned up the scene, but Jisoo still didn't want to talk about that night. Jae-ri knew Jisoo was doing this to protect her honor. Jisoo didn't want her husband to know that she had sold herself to help him pay off his debts. If Jisoo's husband knew the truth, he would live with self-reproach and suffering for the rest of his life. However, Ji-hun still decided to tell him the truth. At this point, Jisoo's husband realized he hadn't been betrayed. Jisoo sacrificed herself so her husband wouldn't go to prison. When the husband watched the video of his wife being abused, he was so heartbroken he couldn't breathe. Ji-hun was certain that Jisoo didn't want her husband to know about these things, because Jisoo feared her husband wouldn't be able to forgive her. Her husband fulfilled her wish. The man asserted that he would never forgive his wife for deceiving him and having an affair with another man. Jisoo's husband pretended to be angry and severely berated his wife, but Jisoo didn't resist. She silently endured her husband's insults. The husband held back tears as he left the interrogation room, and behind him, Jisoo was also confessing her guilt. She didn't know if her initial decision was right or wrong. The girl wanted to retrieve her white handkerchief. It was the only gift her mother had given her before she died. However, her classmate threw the handkerchief out the window. A hand slowly reached out from behind her. The moment she reached for the handkerchief, she was pushed from the 3rd floor. The 3 girls upstairs saw her body on the ground, but they all appeared indifferent. They said they wanted to pull her back, but were too late. Even after many years, the 3 wealthy girls remained the same. They used cold lies to cover up their murder. But one day, 2 of the girls died in the car. From the police call, it's clear that a 3rd person was likely present at the scene. The deceased was Surgeon Min Soo, and the other was bar owner Na-hun. The autopsy report showed that the victim had tetrodotoxin in her body. Forensic expert Choi stated indicated that Na-han died first, then Min-soo. However, Na-han's tetrodotoxin was only found in her stomach, while Min-soo's tetrodotoxin had entered her bloodstream. Jae-ri discovered that the soil under Min-soo's shoes was identical to the soil outside the car. This indicated that Min-soo had left the vehicle. However, strangely, the car doors were locked at the time of the incident. Since Min-soo was a doctor, she surely knew that when she was poisoned, she needed to breathe fresh air. At that moment, Officer Baek saw a black plastic bag by the riverbank. He extracted the needle from it, suggesting it was a murder. The police analyzed that killer had planned to poison both women with coffee, but only Na-hyun drank it. Therefore, killer used the needle to stab Min-soo. Min-soo was so frightened that she quickly returned to the car and hastily locked the doors. But the killer didn't leave. Finally, Min-soo died in the car. Ji-hun felt killer must have known these two women. He picked up an old photograph found in the car. The two young women in the photo were dead. Ji-hun wondered what connection was between the photograph and the case. Minho told Officer Bae that only Na-hun's fingerprints were on the coffee can, while Min-soo's fingerprints were on the syringe. Furthermore, only one of the two coffee cans in the car contained poison. This indicated the killer only wanted to kill one of the two girls. Officer Bae found an envelope from Min-soo's house. Inside was a picture of Min-soo's husband having an affair. The police immediately summoned Dr. Lee to the station. Officer Bae suspected Dr. Lee was the killer because the woman he was having an affair with was Na-hyun. Police Officer Bae believes Min-soo discovered her husband's infidelity, so Dr. Lee wanted to kill her to silence her. However, he didn't expect Na-hyun to accidentally drink poisoned coffee, so he killed his wife in a fit of rage. Doc Lee immediately interrupted Officer Bae, claiming he took the photo himself. He said Na-hyun unexpectedly appeared 5 years ago. Min-soo said they were childhood friends, but Dr. Lee had never heard his wife mention Na-hyun. One day, Na-hyun came to see Dr. Lee. When Min-soo wasn't home, Dr. Lee couldn't resist the temptation and betrayed his wife. Strangely, since that day, Min-soo occasionally went out for research, and Na-hyun seemed to know her friend's schedule. However, Dr. Lee accidentally discovered that his wife wasn't actually going to school or research at all. She was always staying in the same hotel, and Na-hyun had never spoken a kind word to Min-soo. Na-hyun is a very frightening person. Dr. Lee began to suspect that his wife deliberately allowed her best friend to get close to him. So, Dr. Lee took a picture of himself and Na-hyun being intimate. But after Min-soo saw the picture, she became indifferent. Since that day, two of them have become like strangers. But every time Min-soo meets Na-hyun, they still laugh and talk happily. However, starting 6 months ago, Min-soo began to suffer from insomnia. Min-soo can only rely on tranquilizers to control her emotions. Although Dr. Lee's story sounds a bit illogical, how could a woman let her husband sleep with her best friend? Ji-hun's intuition tells him that Dr. Lee might not be lying. The handwriting on the back of the picture is not Dr. Lee's. Jerry goes to Na-hyun's bar to investigate. The girl in the red dress says that Na-hyun and her best friend have an enviable relationship. Na-hyun's bar has been struggling for 5 years. Min-soo not only provided financial support to help Na-hyun overcome her difficulties, but also lured her colleagues to the bar partying. Later, Jerry goes to Na-hyun's house. The friendship between these two women is truly perplexing. The nanny notices that photo in her hand looks somewhat familiar. She says that 6 months ago, after Na-hyun received this photo, she suddenly lost control of her emotions. Na-hyun seemed to go crazy and smash everything. Yesterday, Na-hyun cut off part of the photo and left home. Turns out there are 3 people in the photo. Ji-hun thinks the person cut off must have some kind of secret. Perhaps she is the real killer. Minho discovers the woman's name is Se-jin, but Se-jin died 6 months ago. At that time, Se-jin had only been back in the country for less than a month when she was involved in a fire accident. Aside from the footprints of a stranger at the scene, the police found no other clues. However, Minho found a calendar among the evidence. Someone had circled June 29th with pen. Although no one knew what that date meant, it was likely the key to the case. Min-soo's insomnia, Nan's anger, and Se-jin's murder all happened 6 months prior. But Ji-hun thought this photograph was the breakthrough. The culprit was one of the 3 girls in the picture. Officer Baek felt that if the police wanted to find a clue, they needed to go back to the case that happened 15 years earlier. The police contacted the teacher who had taught the 3 girls in the photograph to ask questions. The teacher said that these 3 girls were not only academically gifted, but also came from very good families. Almost no one in the class dared to provoke them. Ji-hun wanted to know why they transferred schools at the same time right after their first year of high school. One day 15 years ago, a handsome male teacher transferred to this school. The teacher asked if anyone wanted to help him after school. He would treat them to noodles. When the other students saw the 3 girls raise their hands, they didn't dare compete with them. But unexpectedly, Jang-na also raised her hand. After that, Jang-na became the target of these 3 girls. Every day they used every means to bully Jang-na, but Jang-na didn't even dare to resist. Jang-na just endured being bullied by the 3 girls. But suddenly one day, Jong-na accidentally fell from the third floor to the ground and died. Her classmates all believed that Min-sun's group was responsible, but the police couldn't find any evidence. Before Jong-na fell from the third floor, there were only 4 people in the classroom, and one of them fell to her death. Ji-hun believes that if the remaining 3 collude provide false testimony, the police will be unable to uncover the truth. The teacher said that after Jong-na's death, all 3 girls transferred schools. Ji-hun asked the teacher if she remembered the date of the incident. The teacher replied, June 12. Jerry discovered that yesterday was June 12, and this was also the last day for applying the statute of limitations to this case. This means that after yesterday, the 3 girls would no longer be prosecuted. But why was June 26 marked on Na-hyun's phone? Did she get the date wrong? Ji-hun believes that someone must always keep track of the retroactive period for the 3 girls. Police officer Baek investigated and found out that Jang-na has a younger brother, but when the police arrived at the man's residence, they found his body completely decomposed. Forensic examination indicated that he had died approximately 6 months prior. Jae-ri found a diary belonging to Jong-na's younger brother. The boy remembered the day his sister died. He knew his poor sister had died unjustly, but he lacked the courage to kill the 3 murderers. So every day, Jong-na's younger brother took medication to forget his grief. Ultimately, this led to his sudden death in the rented house. The only clue to the case was now broken. So who was the killer? Jae-ri turned to Dr. Lee again. Jae-ri wanted to know if anything strange had happened since Na-hyun appeared. Dr. Lee said there was a seminar abroad 5 years ago, and his wife needed to go away for 2 weeks for training. However, before Min-soo left, she reminded her husband that he absolutely must not tell Na-hyun about this. At this point, Jae-ri suddenly realized that in South Korea, the statute of limitations for prosecution is automatically extended as soon as it approaches. Therefore, Min-soo's prosecution deadline was June 26. Jae-ri went to the hotel where Min-soo usually stayed. Jae-ri analyzed that Na-hyun must also know this secret and used it to threaten Min-soo. Min-soo, fearing imprisonment, agreed to all of Na-hyun's demands. She even offered her husband to Na-hyun. Min-soo was stuck in the hotel with nowhere to vent her anger because even after June 12th, prosecutors still had 14 days to charge Min-soo. She was like puppet. She was blackmailed by someone claiming to be her best friend for 5 years. Police officer Baek discovered that Na-hyun had left South Korea. Na-hyun had spent 17 days in America with Se-jin, so the deadline for prosecuting Na-hyun was June 29. This deadline was 3 days longer than Min-soo's. However, Min-soo had no idea that someone would investigate Na-hyun's immigration records, but the most worried person was undoubtedly Se-jin because her prosecution deadline was the longest. Ji-hun said that this was because Se-jin had become destitute, with nothing left to lose. Therefore, after Se-jin returned to the country, she immediately sent a photo to Na-hyun. Se-jin also wanted to blackmail Min-soo. Jae-ri found the words, "I'm back," on the back of photo. It turned out to be Se-jin's handwriting. Furthermore, footprints were found at the scene of Se-jin's death, and the owner of those footprints was Na-hyun. From this, the police could deduce that Na-hyun feared Se-jin would reveal the secret about her going abroad and tell Min-soo about it. Because Na-hyun's trial period was 3 days longer than Min-soo's, Na-hyun feared retaliation. Therefore, she silenced Se-jin forever. Na-hyun murdered Se-jin and Min-soo murdered Na-hyun. So who killed Min-soo? These 3 were once good friends, but they were all concerned about each other's prosecution deadlines. Ultimately, because they suspected each other, they all met their deaths. At this point, forensic Dr. Choi told Ji-hun that there were no needle marks on Min-soo's body, except for injection sites. Ji-hun asked if there was a way to get poison into the body. Forensic Dr. Choi replied that it could be through the respiratory system. The forensic team found tetrodotoxin spilled in the Bray car. It turned out that on June 12, Min-soo had arranged to meet Na-hyun. Although Na-hyun insisted she would abide by the agreement, Min-soo, having been blackmailed for 5 years, still felt anxious. Min-soo took advantage of Na-hyun's bathroom break, took out the prepared tetrodotoxin, and injected it into a can of coffee. However, due to her anxiety, she spilled the remaining poison in the car. When they arrived at the lake, Na-hyun drank coffee. At this point, the poison in Na-hyun's body began to take effect. To prevent others from seeing and to allow the poison to take effect, Min-soo closed the car windows, but Min-soo forgot that tetrodotoxin had spilled in the car. As the temperature inside the car rose, Min-soo also inhaled a large amount of poison. Immediately after successfully killing Na-hyun, she decisively threw the murder weapon into the river. At this time, Min-soo also began to feel unwell. She still hadn't realized she had been poisoned, but she only thought it was because she was too stressed. However, her body's overreaction made her realize something was wrong. By the time Min-soo called the police for help, it was too late. Minho wanted to know who the third person was. Ji-hun analyzed the photos after the case. This billboard should have been hanging on a tree at that time. Min-soo had deliriously seen the banner dancing. Min-soo believed it was the innocent ghost of Jong-na coming to find her. The poison in her body accelerated Min-soo's mental disorder. The red flag, like Jongna's white scarf, was constantly stained with blood. That's why Min Soo made frightened sounds. This led the police to mistakenly believe there was a third person in the car. Although this was only Ji-hoon's speculation, in the end, the girl who died unjustly 15 years ago was able to rest in peace. If Jongna could choose again, she definitely wouldn't raise her hand. Bullying not only shames the victims, but it also claims the lives of many students. The next day, Minho didn't come to the office. Instead, he sent a package. When Officer Baek opened the package, he found a cell phone inside. However, the video on the phone caused Officer Baek's expression to change drastically. Minho had been kidnapped. The kidnapper had given the special task force a mission. They had to find the real culprit in the murder case for 9 p.m. tonight. This case occurred at a bar at the horse racing track. Around 1 a.m. last night, a serious crime took place at the bar in Mendong. A man and a woman were shot dead on the spot. The video on the phone was recorded at 4:25 a.m. Minho finished work at 2 a.m. He was probably kidnapped on his way home. The handcuffs Minho wore in the video were only issued to criminal investigators, but Minho's handcuffs were in the office. Therefore, the kidnapper could be a police officer, and he knew the special task force very well. In this situation, the team absolutely couldn't let kidnapper manipulate them. The special task force decided to split up to investigate. Officer Baek would track down the kidnapper, while Ji-hun and Jae-ri would investigate the murder case. But they didn't expect that the murder at the bar had already been solved. It was a brutal shooting stemming from a personal vendetta. The suspect, Jin-hyuk, was a member of the serious crime unit. It seemed things weren't that simple. A total of 6 shots were fired at the scene. Both victims sustained fatal injuries. One victim was wounded in the heart, the other in the carotid artery. There were bloodstains on the clothes next to the body, but there was also a dark stain mixed with blood. At the time of the incident, the Internal Investigation Department had taken a picture of Jin-hyuk. Jin-hyuk was investigating Lee Gun's death. Jin-hyuk made money by selling information to Lee Gun. Jin-hyuk had a romantic relationship with the deceased female manager. It's possible that Jin-hyuk discovered his lover's betrayal, so he was shot and killed in a fit of rage. Officer Baek found Minho's car. This is a sparsely populated area, so there's no surveillance system. Based on the scene, there are no signs that Minho was forcibly dragged out of the car. The kidnapper pretended it was an accident and tricked Minho into getting out of the car on his own. Officer Baek took a piece of the car's headlight to his former colleague, asking for his help in finding the car. Jin-hyuk's house was in a mess. It seems that while he was investigating, the police had already started a manhunt for him. There were numerous bullet holes in the wall, but strangely, the internal investigation report indicated that Jin-hyuk had attempted to escape through a window, which is why the police shot him. However, nearby residents reported hearing the first 2 gunshots before seeing someone jump out of the window. The examination of the black stain on the clothes also yielded results. It was shoe polish. Perhaps perpetrator used clothes to wipe away blood stains from his leather shoes, but at the time, Jin-hyuk was wearing sneakers. This proves that Jin-hyuk was indeed wrongly accused. The shooting wasn't to apprehend Jin-hyuk, to eliminate him. The distance from the kidnapping scene to the construction site was quite short, only about 2 hours by car. There were a total of 5 locations along the way. Officer Baek investigated 3 locations, but he still hadn't found anything. Ji-hun realized that the murder involved high-ranking officials within the police department, but to save Minho, Ji-hun would do anything to investigate to the end. What was certain now was that Jin-hyuk had been wrongly accused. The crime occurred at 1 a.m., and Minho was kidnapped at 2 a.m. What was Jin-hyuk's motive for risking his life like that? Now, finding the real killer was no longer simple. If the special task force didn't handle the case well, Minho would become a scapegoat. Jae-ri found many cell phones in Jin-hyuk's car, but the Internal Investigation Department intervened, so Jae-ri could only secretly take the phones. Finally, Officer Baek found the location where the video of Minho's kidnapping was filmed, but the place had been abandoned for a long time. Car used to kidnap Minho was also found. Although Officer Baek hasn't found the person yet, he found many empty water bottles in the trunk of car. This proves that Minho is still alive. Jae-ri found a photo from those phones. The girl in the photo is a high school student named Mi-rae. She was the witness who accused Lee Gun and the corrupt officials of accepting bribes. But half a month ago, Mi-rae suddenly disappeared. Mi-rae knew Lee Gun had connections within the police force, so she contacted the Internal Investigation Department directly. Lee Gun was probably killed by this mysterious internal police officer. Jae-ri discovered that Mi-rae had been arrested by the police, and 10 days ago, Lee Gun gave Mi-rae's photo to Jin-hyuk, and the police officer who took Mi-rae away was definitely Jin-hyuk. Jae-ri found Mi-rae's friend to ask about it. She said that a man had been taking very good care of her and Mi-rae. He often invited them to dinner. He also said that if anything happened to the 2 of them, they should call him. However, Mi-rae didn't want to cause trouble for that man, so she didn't contact him. But at the last moment, Mi-rae felt danger, so she asked her friends to call that man for help, and that man was a police officer named Ma Seok. Finally, Officer Bae found the hotel where Jin Hyuk was hiding, but before he could act, the internal investigation team rushed over. The room was very clean. It seemed like Jin Hyuk had never stayed there. This time, the police had alerted Jin Hyuk. The time was getting closer and closer to 9 p.m. Jin Hyuk had cut off Minho's finger and sent it to the special task force. Jin Hyuk hadn't killed Minho for some reason. What the special task force lacked now was time. Although Ji-hun knew Jin Hyuk was innocent, finding the culprit so quickly wouldn't be easy. The only way is to broadcast the 9 p.m. evening news. The police need to create a fake news story to deceive Jin Hyuk. This matter must be investigated thoroughly. However, police need to prioritize saving Minho's life first. Ji-hun had arranged with Jin Hyuk that he would release Minho while the news was airing. Ma Seok is a police officer who has worked in the internal investigation team for 24 years. He is the one who repeatedly fired shots at Jin Hyuk during the chase. He is also the one who filmed Jin Hyuk outside the bar. Ma Seok is also the person Officer Bae met at the hotel this morning. Currently, no one can find Ma Seok anymore. Could he be the real mastermind? At 9 p.m., Jin Hyuk arrived at the meeting point on time. After watching the last news broadcast, Jin Hyuk let his guard down. But just as Jin Hyuk was about to reveal Minho's location, a car suddenly sped out. It was Ma Seok. As soon as he got out of the car, he rushed towards Jin Hyuk. Minho wouldn't be rescued if Jin Hyuk was killed. Officer Bae quickly stopped Ma Seok while Ji-hun chased after Jin Hyuk, but Ji-hun still let him escape because Jin Hyuk had been provoked by Ma Seok in that way. Minho's condition was likely very bad. Jin Hyuk stole a gun and ammunition from a police officer, then led Minho up the mountain. The final tragedy had occurred. This was a major blow to the special task force. Ji-hun decided to pursue Jin Hyuk with all his might. This case involved corruption within the police force. Therefore, those involved would be held accountable regardless of their rank. This wasn't just for Minho's sake, but also to correct the unhealthy tendencies within the police. At the same time, this would be the special task force's final mission. Ji-hun wanted to know why Ma Seok always wanted kill Jin Hyuk, but Ji-hun didn't expect that Ma Seok actually wanted to save Mi-rae. Before Mi-rae was kidnapped, she had sent a message asking for help. Ma Seok was 48 years old, still single. He didn't have any special achievements or accomplishments. Ma Seok had been a boring police officer for 24 years. He treated Mi-rae like his own daughter and loved her dearly. After Jin Hyuk took Mi-rae away, Ma Seok hadn't heard from her since, which is why he was so worried. The key figures now are Mi-rae and Jin Hyuk. Everything started after Jin Hyuk kidnapped Mi-rae. There must be something very important related to Mi-rae, and this thing has probably now fallen into Jin Hyuk's hands. He was merely a messenger for Lee Gun, but a week ago, after Jin Hyuk kidnapped Mi-rae, he suddenly seemed to become a different person. Lee Gun proactively offered him 500 million won. Therefore, what Jin Hyuk holds is very likely what will bring down Lee Gun. On the day Lee Gun intended to give Jin Hyuk the money, Lee Gun was killed, so Jin Hyuk kidnapped Minho and asked the special task force to investigate the person behind the incident. But now, Jin Hyuk has killed Minho, and this means he has found another way to protect himself. The most important thing in this chain of corrupt interest is the ledger. It seems Jin Hyuk has obtained it. Jae-ri discovered that this ledger is actually a phone card. Lee Gun spent 500 million won to buy it back. Now, everyone finally understands why Lee Gun was killed, because the secrets in the ledger were not revealed. But Lee Gun made an unforgivable mistake. Problem here is why the murder at the bar happened that night. Jin Hyuk didn't use the ledger either. Instead, he kidnapped Minho. The only possibility is that Jin Hyuk hid the ledger while fleeing. Since Jin Hyuk couldn't retrieve it, he kidnapped Minho to distract police. Then, Jin Hyuk could use the opportunity to get the ledger back. But where did Jin Hyuk hide the ledger? At this moment, Jae-ri remembered that she had found many cell phones in Jin Hyuk's car. This was the only thing Jin Hyuk had forgotten besides the ledger. Could the ledger be hidden in the car? After the special task force found Jin Hyuk's car, they immediately set up an ambush around it. Sure enough, Jin Hyuk came looking for his car, but he was very cautious. After he spotted Ji-hun, he immediately turned and ran away. Just as the special task force was chasing Jin Hyuk, someone secretly took the car away, and the car thief turned out to be Minho. Although Jin Hyuk had escaped, Minho was still alive. But why would Minho help Jin Hyuk? Although the special task force couldn't find the answer, they could only trust Minho now. Jin Hyuk had obtained the ledger, and his next step was to make a deal with the mastermind. After knocking Minho unconscious, Jin Hyuk hid him somewhere and sent the special task force to find him. Jin Hyuk used the same method as before to attract police's attention. Then, Jin Hyuk went to the transaction location. The special task force split into two groups to act. Officers Baek and Jae-ri would go to rescue Minho, while Ji-hun continued to monitor Jin Hyuk. Ji-hun followed the internal investigation team to a certain place, but as soon as Ji-hun entered, he heard gunshots. The internal investigation team arrived to check the situation. Ji-hun discovered someone had secretly escaped through an alleyway, so he followed the figure into a field. However, Ji-hun couldn't couldn't find any trace of person. After returning to the scene, he found Jin Hyuk shot dead. Ma-seok, standing nearby, loudly asked where Mi-rae was. Unfortunately, Jin Hyuk was now dead, so the police might not be able to find Mi-rae. This deeply saddened Ma-seok. At the same time, Officer Baek and Jae-ri found the place where Minho was being held, but there were too many containers, so they couldn't pinpoint the exact location. A short while later, police arrived. Officer Baek feared the mastermind was among them. If he secretly attacked Minho, all the special task force's effort would be in vain. Officer Baek instructed everyone to put their guns in the trunk of their car. Then, they began searching for Minho. After a while, they finally found Minho. Minho didn't disappoint. Before Jin Hyuk knocked him unconscious, he secretly took the phone card. Jin Hyuk is now dead. The internal investigation team wants to speak with Minho, as he's currently the only person who's had contact with Jin Hyuk. However, Minho is bleeding profusely, so they can only talk in the ambulance. Ma-seok is still worried about Mi-rae. He asks Jin Hyuk if he's ever mentioned her, but Minho is mostly held captive by Jin Hyuk, so he doesn't have many opportunities to talk to him. The ambulance suddenly crashes into something. Officer Baek says he suspected the mastermind wouldn't give up easily. He wants to kill Minho to silence him and take the ledger. Officer Baek gets out of the ambulance to check, leaving Ma-seok and Minho inside. When no one is around, Ma-seok finally reveals his true nature. Ma-seok pointed a gun at Minho's head and snatched his phone card, but Ma-seok couldn't have imagined that all of this had been orchestrated against him. When Jin Hyuk died, Ji-hun realized something was wrong. Ji-hun noticed mud on Ma-seok's shoes. This indicated that the person Ji-hun hadn't caught was Ma-seok. He knew that if Ma-seok didn't get the ledger, he would definitely attack Minho. Therefore, Ji-hun instructed Officer Baek to remove the bullet from Ma-seok's gun. Ma-seok was the real mastermind. Ma-seok was the one who killed the people at the bar. Mi-rae was also killed by Ma-seok to deceive others. Ma-seok used Mi-rae's phone to send a distress message. The case was finally closed, and many people were involved in this matter. In total, more than 40 high-ranking police officials were arrested. Since Ma-seok's arrest, he has remained silent. Perhaps there are others hiding even deeper who haven't been caught yet. The chief was also terrified by this case. He thought that no matter how intelligent the dog was, if it didn't recognize its owner, it was worthless. Clearly, the presence of the special task force had frightened Chief. Ji-hun also realized that he might have touched something he shouldn't have. To protect the members of the special task force, Ji-hun decided to disband the team from now on. The other members would return to their positions and continue their work. The film ends here. Goodbye, and see you in the next videos.